join in the minutes.
Okay, I will use the gavel in honor of the judiciary this morning. Welcome to the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. We have 3 for 4 members. I believe Senator Rosepep is on his way. We're hearing 4 budgets this morning. We'll start with the judiciary, then go to Maryland Department of Emergency Management, then MDOT WMATA, and then DPSCS corrections. We are joined by Jacob, our analyst. Jacob, take it away with judiciary, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. The executive summary for the judiciary, obviously the branch of state government tasked with adjudicating legal disputes and interpreting and applying the laws of the state. While the judiciary's budget is submitted as part of the governor's budget, it is developed without executive branch oversight. This year, the judiciary's budget increases 34 million or 4.7% to a total of 759 million. So we could see growth over the past couple of years here. Just a few key observations before I delve into some of the deeper matters. The fiscal 2022 court performance measures report was submitted to the budget committees in December of 2022. This report highlighted a number of trends in various types of cases heard by trial courts throughout the state. Notably, average case times have risen across the 9 categories of cases tracked by the judiciary in circuit courts since fiscal 2019. Civil general, foreclosure, and limited divorces have all experienced average case time increases of more than 100 days in the fiscal 22 report. The Maryland Electronic Courts, otherwise known as MDEC rollout, is continuing with the judiciary's new case management system having launched in Prince George's County in October of 2022. That now means that 23 of the 24 courts have completed their MDEC integration. The last circuit court to implement MDEC is Baltimore City, which is currently scheduled to complete the process sometime in fiscal 24. Lastly, the judiciary's programs continue to provide increased access to justice. Programs administered by the judiciary have continued to provide a positive impact for Marylanders. In fiscal 22, the judiciary's help centers, which offer legal aid, provided services to litigants 187,267 times, which is a significant increase from fiscal 21, where support was provided just over 147,000 times. Separately, the Access to Counsel and Evictions program provided assistance in eviction proceedings to renters in just over 1,500 cases spread across 11 phase 1 counties, which we'll cover in a little bit, during the first half of fiscal 23. The judiciary is composed of 4 courts and 5 other programs which support the administrative, personnel, technological, and regulatory functions of the judicial branch of the state government. The courts consist of the Supreme Court of Maryland, formerly known as the Court of Appeals. That's a new change. The Appellate Court of Maryland, which is also a new name. The Circuit Courts and the District Court. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Maryland is the administrative head of the state's judicial system, and the Chief Justice appoints a state court administrator to act as head of the administrative office of the courts to carry out administrative duties, including data analysis, personnel management, education, and training for judicial personnel. There are multiple other units included under the administrative and budgetary purview of the judiciary, including the Rules Committee, the Commission on Judicial Disabilities, and the Maryland State Board of Law Examiners. Additionally, the Thurgood Marshall State Law Library serves the legal information needs of the state, and Judicial Information Systems manages information systems maintenance and information technology development for the judiciary. Moving into some analysis of performance, we have talking more about court case clearance rates remaining above the judiciary's time standard, and the annual court performance measures report submitted in December 2022. The report used data from 2019, owing to the judiciary's stated inability to submit this report in calendar 2021 due to suspension of time standards in courts during the COVID-19 pandemic. This report expounded on the fact that the judiciary faced a number of challenges in hearing cases during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that backlogs do continue to exist, both due to COVID-19 and due to other factors. One notable example of this, case processing time increased in fiscal 2022 in all 9 case categories for which circuit court data was submitted. As an example, foreclosure cases had an average time of 636 days in fiscal 2022, which is more than double the 314 days those cases took in fiscal 2019. Exhibit 1, which we will find on page 4, shows an average, shows the average case processing time in circuit courts by case type. So we can see increases, increases from 2019, with 2022 being shown in yellow and 2019 being shown in blue. The red diamonds seen on this chart indicate the time standard in days. TPR is termination of parental rights, and CINA is child in need of assistance. Moving along. The number of cases over standard due to COVID-19 versus other reasons. In fiscal 2022, the judiciary reported, see if I can fit all this on the screen, the yellow as cases over standard due to COVID-19, and the blue as cases over standard not due to COVID-19. Hence, the full line for each case represents the total number of cases over standard. Criminal cases experienced the most new cases over standard due to COVID-19 in fiscal 2022. Additionally, the data shows that few cases going over the time standard in the areas of limited divorce, juvenile delinquency, CINA shelter, and CINA non-shelter went over due to COVID-19. We also have some data on suspensions here. The judiciary's case time standards allow for the suspension of case time if certain events occur that halt the court's ability to advance the case forward. The suspension data submitted as part of the court performance measures report showed that across the 9 types of cases tracked by the judiciary, 8 categories had at least 1 suspension in fiscal 2022, and foreclosures had the highest rate of cases suspended at 32%. And we have data for suspensions across all tracked case types in Exhibit 3, which is found on page 6. Blue being cases with no suspensions, yellow cases with 1 or more suspensions. The judiciary should comment on what the expected timeline is for average case processing times to return to 2019 levels and what is being done operationally to accomplish this timeline goal. Additionally, the Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting the submission of the report on court performance measures for fiscal 2023. Help centers offered by the judiciary have continued to support legal needs of Marylanders. In recent years, legal assistance programs from the judiciary and pro bono legal service providers have continued to expand their offerings to individuals involved in non-criminal cases in the state. The judiciary has established and continues to grow several programs designed to assist litigants in court matters. These programs provide attorneys for short duration, limited representation, or for facilitating effective self-representation. These services, rather than full representation, allow legal aid to be provided to a higher number of litigants. This method of delivering legal aid allows for broader offerings of legal assistance and improves access to justice across Maryland. As of fiscal 2022, the most recent year data has been made available for. The judiciary offered 3 separate types of help centers to deliver legal aid to litigants. Maryland Court Help Center is a remote call and contact center providing assistance via phone, live chat, or email. The help center is staffed by the Maryland Center for Legal Assistance. Family law help centers are walk-in centers providing support to litigants in family law cases across the state. These centers are supported by grants provided by the Administrative Office of the Courts, and the District Court Help Centers. The judiciary contracts with the Maryland Center for Legal Assistance to staff these walk-in centers. Maryland Court Help Center was able to operate at full capacity during the COVID-19 pandemic due to its nature as being a remote operation. Usage of the Maryland Court Help Center has increased in every fiscal year since 2016. As the service has become more popular, it has increased from providing support 31,181 times in fiscal 2016 to 113,890 instances in fiscal 2022. The family law and district court centers, being walk-in centers, were heavily impacted by COVID-19 closures in fiscal 2020 through fiscal 2022. They've since returned to normal operations following the pandemic, surpassing usage levels from fiscal 2019. In fiscal 2022, as we'll see in Exhibit 4, which is on page 8, in Exhibit 4, we see that the district court centers delivered support 26,841 times, while in fiscal 2019, that figure stood at 22,681. The district court help centers are the dark blue at the bottom, the family law court help centers in green in the middle, and the remote services center in yellow at the top. The judiciary's budget provides funding for 10 programs. These programs include the trial courts, the district and circuit courts, the appellate courts, the Appellate Court of Maryland, and the Supreme Court of Maryland, the Administrative Office of the Courts, and various other support functions. Exhibit 5, found on page 9, identifies how these funds are allocated across the major functions of the judiciary. The trial courts occupy 66% of the budget at $503 million. The Administrative Office of the Courts is budgeted at $120 million, which is good for 16% of the allowance for fiscal 2024. Moving to page 10, we have the judiciary's budget request increasing by $34 million, or about 4.7%. This growth is driven by statutory salary increases for judges, merit increases for other staff, and funding for new positions in the area of personnel, as well as a number of other changes. We can scroll just a little bit here. We have the annualization of November 2022's 4.5% cost of living adjustment, we have funding for 15.25 new positions, making significant changes in the area of personnel expenses. And then in terms of other changes, we have continued progress in the Courthouse e-readiness project. Courthouse e-readiness is introducing infrastructure upgrades to support operations and the implementation of MDEC, Maryland Electronic Courts. We have the per diem for jury service increasing from $15 to $30 per day as enacted in 2020-22. And one removal that we have, among others, is the removal of direct funding for access to counsel and evictions. That funding is shifting to the Office of the Attorney General this year, and that will be covered further in that analysis coming soon. The 2020-21 Judicial Compensation Commission recommendation recommended that judicial compensation increase by $10,000 per year from fiscal 2023 to 2026. This year's budget does reflect the continued implementation of these judicial compensation increases. As previously mentioned, Chapter 546 of 2022 increased the state per diem paid to jurors from $15 per day to $30 per day for the first 5 days of jury service. The per diem of $50 per day given after the first 5 days was not altered. The impact is an additional $4.3 million in fiscal 2024. Major IT project costs on page 12 are projected to be approximately $22.7 million in fiscal 2024. This represents an estimated increase of $5 million from the fiscal 2023 estimated spending on these projects. This increase is driven by increased costs for the rollout of MDEC, along with the associated courthouse e-readiness project, which is designed to ensure that electrical and network infrastructure in courthouses can support MDEC, along with other planned major IT projects. Access to counsel and evictions funding, as previously mentioned, is shifting to the Office of the Attorney General in fiscal 2024. The funding is the Maryland Legal Services Commission is a nonprofit corporation that provides civil legal services to low-income Marylanders, whose mission is to provide stable, efficient, and effective civil legal assistance through the distribution of funds to nonprofit legal service organizations. MLSC traditionally receives funding from the Interest on Lawyer Trust Accounts program, IOLTA, surcharges from court filing fees, and a distribution from the Abandoned Property Fund. Chapter 746 of 2021 also assigned responsibility for administering the Access to Counsel and Evictions Special Fund and associated program. As previously mentioned, with the funding moving to OAG this year, administration responsibility stays with MLSC. Personnel data is found on page 12 of this analysis. We'll see that the judiciary is gaining 15.25 positions in fiscal 24, with 304.05 positions vacant as of December 31st of 2022. That's about a 7.34% vacancy rate. The new positions in the judiciary's fiscal 2024 allowance include 1 circuit court judge and 1 magistrate for Baltimore County, as well as support staff. This request for new judges was made after the submission of the judiciary's annual report on the need for judgeships. The report for fiscal 2024 did certify a need for 7 judgeships, but the judiciary is only requesting 1 judge position and 1 magistrate position in light of its recognition of budgetary considerations and space constraints within the courthouses where additional need was certified. With that said, DLS recommends adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on judgeship needs for fiscal 2025. The district courts will also gain a problem-solving courts case manager along with clerks as part of the request for new positions. And the remaining requests for new positions will support the Judicial College, the Rules Committee, the Thurgood Marshall State Law Library, and Judicial Disabilities. It's also worth noting the judiciary is currently experiencing a comparatively high vacancy rate at 7.34%, as previously mentioned. The judiciary should comment on what has led to this increase in vacancies, along with what is being done to bring the vacancy rate down to the budgeted turnover rate. We can then move on to some of the bigger issues discussed in this analysis, starting on page 14. The judiciary programs have increased access to justice resources. with a critical part of the judiciary's mission being not only trying cases in courts, but ensuring that all cases administered provide a fair and equitable right to representation in trial. As such, the judiciary maintains a number of direct and grant-funded programs supported by the Administrative Office of the Courts, which promote access to attorneys and other forms of legal assistance. The Appointed Attorney Program was created by the General Assembly in 2014 to ensure state compliance with the decision issued by the Supreme Court of Maryland in DeWolf v. Richmond. Under the Appointed Attorney Program, the judiciary supplies attorneys to represent indigent defendants at initial appearances before district court commissioners. Excuse me. These attorneys are private attorneys who are compensated by the state at a rate of $60 per hour. In each year since the program's inception, the budget committees have required the judiciary to report on the cost of the program. The data found in Exhibit 7, which is below on page 14, also shows that the data shows that the program stayed within its appropriation overall, but certain counties did exceed their allocation of funds while others had funding remaining. Full data, as previously mentioned, may be found in Exhibit 7. In fiscal 2022, $8.25 million of the judiciary's general fund appropriation was restricted for the purpose of appointing attorneys for the purpose of required representation at initial appearances before district court commissioners. However, in fiscal 2022, which the data shows several jurisdictions exceeded the amount of funding allocated for them in this program. In order for the state to ensure that all indigent defendants have access to counsel at their initial appearances before district court commissioners, it is critical that this program have the monetary resources available to provide counsel. Additionally, the judiciary submitted a report last year on the costs of the Appointed Attorney Program, as requested in the 2022 Joint Chairman's Report. However, the report also requested statistics on the utilization of the program, which were not provided in great detail in the submitted report. DLS further recommends adopting budget bill language restricting $8.25 million of the general funds to be used for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond. DLS also recommends adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on the costs and utilization of the Appointed Attorney Program, including the results of initial appearances before district court commissioners when attorneys were appointed to represent indigent defendants as part of the Appointed Attorney Program. We can then move on to the rollout of MDEC in Baltimore City. As previously mentioned, that is the last jurisdiction of 24 jurisdictions to implement the MDEC program. The rollout of MDEC in Baltimore City is considerably more complex than in other jurisdictions for a couple of reasons, including different software that has previously been used to support court functions and challenges presented by physical infrastructure in the 7 court locations. The Baltimore City Circuit Court and District Court currently utilize 6 different systems for various court functions, which is a significant difference from other jurisdictions, which have only had 1 system which needed to be converted to MDEC. 3 of the systems in Baltimore City are managed by external vendors, and these vendors will need to work with the judiciary to convert their systems over to MDEC. Additionally, aging building infrastructure has presented challenges in ensuring that the computer networks are ready to support the technological needs of MDEC, and network and electrical wiring, along with wireless access, all present potential challenges to MDEC implementation, and these challenges are currently being evaluated. MDEC is still projected to go online in Baltimore City in fiscal 2024, with the estimated remaining cost of the rollout of MDEC in Baltimore City as of December 2022 displayed in Exhibit 8. DLS recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting that the judiciary submit quarterly reports on the status of the implementation of MDEC in Baltimore City. Moving to our next issue, there's a projected shortfall in the Circuit Court Real Property Records Improvement Fund. The Circuit Court Real Property Records Improvement Fund is used for a variety of purposes, including major IT projects in the judiciary, circuit court office operations, and the State Archives MD Land Rec program. This fund receives revenues from surcharge and copy fees, as well as e-filing service fees. Additionally, Chapter 522 of 2022 allowed the judiciary to make a transfer of $12 million to this fund from general funds. The fund is currently projected to have a structural shortfall in fiscal 2023 through 2027, with data on the fund's projected balances being found in Exhibit 9 on page 17 of this analysis. While the fund is not projected to run out of money in the time period covered by the projections, the total fund balance is projected to decline by more than $40 million. This could lead to operational struggles in future years if the fund's revenue sources and amounts are not changed and the same level of spending is maintained. Because these funds are used to support major IT projects, the decrease in the projected fund balance over the next several years represents a potential challenge in funding future major IT projects. Therefore, DLS recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting a report on the judiciary's major IT projects, including the anticipated costs of major IT projects through fiscal 2028. We then reach the operating budget recommended actions, of which there are 5 this year. Among them, as previously mentioned, a report on the costs and operations of the appointed attorney program, the judgeship need for fiscal 2025, the judiciary status report on major information technology development projects, the annual court performance measures report, and budget bill language regarding the $8.25 million restriction for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond. With that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jacob. Thorough as always. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jacob. Just a couple of questions before the judiciary comes up. So when you speak of the shortage and the judgeships from a staffing need, the vacancies, and we're requesting the report, is there also somewhere we can find, because there's staff associated with the judges? Do we have those numbers anywhere as well?
I'm sorry, you're asking
So,
about,
so for the staff numbers as well, in addition to, if you have shortages with the judges, is there any way we can get those numbers as well?
so you'd like a breakdown between the numbers of vacancies in judges and the numbers of vacancies in their support staff?
Absolutely.
I can see if I can have that, but I would also definitely recommend asking the judiciary.
Oh, absolutely.
Just to make sure that.
I do plan to do that.
Yeah, just
So-
to make sure.
So I was
Thank
just
you.
wondering if you had access to those materials. And secondly, when we talk about the IT portion of the budget, 13% of the budget, and we know the systems with MDEC and other systems, over the years, these are up and down trends. Is there any projection, I guess this may be for the judiciary as well, where that 13% of the entire judiciary budget, any hopes once MDEC comes on board, there's always some IT dollars that we're going to have to deal with, that maybe those, and what would happen with those dollars, that 13%, if let's say it goes on to 10%, does it 3%? What do we do with that?
Sure. So over the next several years, the projections do have major IT project costs remaining high as other projects enter development, enter production, and then are implemented.
Right.
So MDEC does not represent the implementation of MDEC fully does not represent a massive decline in IT project spending.
Okay. All right. I'll reserve the rest for our friends. Thank you.
Jacob, I do have one question on page 2. Speaking of the eviction proceedings
Yes.
and a number of times access to counsel and evictions has provided assistance in 1,508 cases. Well, how's that relate to demand? Do we know that?
Sure. So I am currently working on getting that information together, and I expect to have it available as part of the Office of the Attorney General analysis. But at this moment, I don't have the data yet.
All right, I appreciate that.
Got it.
And then Jacob, can you just speak, I know the judiciary is going to cover it, but in the final budget recommendation, we have the number of 8.25 million. But we're going to need to think about that, correct?
Yes, as I understand it from the judiciary, the appointed attorney program is budgeted at 9.25 million in fiscal 24. So that is definitely something to look into.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for Jacob? Senator Jackson.
So it looks like 11 jurisdictions did not participate in that appointed attorneys program last year.
That's not correct. You might need, I'm sorry.
We can wait. I can't, when I looked, it jumped out at me, and I'm sure that
I think it was just, it's phased in, I believe. Yeah. Okay. With that, We have Chief Justice Fader. I apologize, I didn't recognize you without your fancy robes from the inauguration. And we have Chief Judge Morrissey, and we have Pamela Harris from Maryland Judiciary. Welcome in whatever order you'd like.
Thank you, Senator Elfreth, and members of the committee. We really appreciate all of your consideration of the budget. Thank you to Mr. Polikoff for the detailed and thorough review. We have reviewed the all of the recommended actions and the narratives, and we concur. The judiciary concurs with all of them. We have responded to the in writing to the requested comments, so you have that information. And with that, we are available for any questions you have.
Would you like me to answer?
Please, thank you.
I don't know, Pam Harris, for the record. Senator Jackson, the circuit court judges, their staff, their administrative assistant is paid for by the local jurisdiction. So the only other thing that a circuit court judge receives is a law clerk, and that is through our budget. You're welcome.
The district court side, Senator, it's each judge comes with a courtroom clerk and 2 bailiffs. And to answer your other questions on that, the one exhibit that showed the county utilization of the appointed attorney program is a kind of a throwback from when the program first started in 2014, and there was language at that time that said if we exceeded whatever the budget amount was, that the counties were responsible for that overage on it. And so they just at that time picked numbers out of the air kind of and assigned them to each county. And we've, from the inception of the program, I've never run it that way. It's a communal effort. Depending on, the need is the need wherever it is. Every county has this program in effect. And what you're seeing is whether counties went over their kind of made up number from 2014. So the good news is we stayed within budget. And then the reason why it would be 9.5 million rather than 8.5 million is last year there was an increase of $10 to the panel attorneys that are used by the public defenders. In what we pay our appointed attorneys is tied to the panel by statute. So we had to increase their fee from $50 to $60, which I think was appropriate, but they do a great job for us, and I'm very proud of that program.
Senator.
Madam Chair, so Judge, thank you for the explanation on the chart, on the exhibit. So would I find the actual numbers at the local jurisdiction, or do I follow up with you regarding the appointed attorneys program?
You can certainly follow up with me. We have them in a report that we send to you all already, and I'll just make sure you get another copy of
I
that.
appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you. I think I saw, I couldn't find it just a minute. You have about 4,500 employees. Does that sound right?
Mhm.
What are, some of them are judges, and what are most, what are the big buckets of your 4,500 employees? How would you divide them up by occupation?
Clerks in the field working for both the circuit courts and the district court. That's the big bucket.
That's a big bucket.
Mhm.
Makes sense. You show for state agencies, for state government, and for all employers, a relatively low vacancy rate.
I know we were surprised when the vacancy rate was described as, it's larger compared to our normal vacancy rate. But yes, we have been experiencing during the pandemic a large vacancy rate. People have left us, a lot of retirements, a lot.
Okay, well, that's where I was going with this. I mean, your vacancy rates are lower than for other folks we've been seeing. But they're higher than, they're too high for you is what you're saying.
Yes.
Gotcha. We say it's retirement. Is that because your workforce is relatively older, perhaps? Than other
I know
employers?
that we've had a lot of retirements, and I
No.
know that other people have left maybe because they couldn't telework, because our courts are open to the public and some of our people can't telework.
Gotcha.
There's a lot of different reasons. Of course, you might have an unhappy employee that wants to go to work someplace else.
No, I understand that.
But it's, we don't know the exact reason for our increase, but I think it's good that we're low compared to many
To other
other
folks.
agencies. But I think it's indicative of what's going on in the United States.
What tend to be the credentials and qualifications for the majority of your jobs?
Clerks just need a high school education, going up through lawyers, or PhDs. It just depends where.
Right, but I'm saying would the great bulk be high school diploma and you train them? Is that basically the way it
High
works?
school and college, and we train, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank you so much for all the information. There's one thing I've learned, and it's the help centers and how, so the pro bono work and the legal services. And I look at the numbers. I know the family court, the Maryland court, family law and district court. The question is, this hope is a good question. How well are we doing? Are we doing okay? Do we need more help? You know, because we know a lot of times in our areas, we've seen a lot of places in our nation, we have a lot that are needed. And I'm just wondering how we're doing here.
You good. We fight over trying to answer this question because it's one of the happiest things we do.
Senator, I think that the state of Maryland is doing very well with respect to serving our self-represented and people in need of those. In fact, I believe we're ranked in the top. We're either second or third in the nation in providing these type of services. Ms. Harris and I came on she came on a little bit before me in 2014, and there was one existing center in Glen Burnie, and we took a trip to see it. We had heard great things, and from that day forward, we started expanding it across the state. So it's a mix of physical walk-in centers because we think that's important. People like to sometimes or need to sit down with others. And then there's the remote access that's open we've even expanded the hours to after court hours. So it runs from 8:30 to 8 o'clock in the evening. You could either call or chat or send an email in, and you'll get a trained lawyer that's employed by a subsidiary of Legal Aid. We work very closely with them, and I'd like to thank them for all the services that they've provided to us.
We're nationally renowned with our services. We're number 2 in the nation for the services that we provide. And yes, we will probably always ask you for more money to do this.
Which is not surprising. No, I want to thank you because that's important to all of us, making sure that there are services there that are less fortunate, that do need that type of help. And if we're doing great, that makes me happy. I'm sure we want to continue to make everybody happy, but thank you very much. Thank you.
And Senator, to answer your one question about ACE, even though that's access to counsel, even though that's a program that we don't run, I can tell you there's 2 things. They do the in-court representation, but I think that number significantly underestimates what they're doing. And that's if they can catch the person before they have to come to trial and hook them up with the ERAP monies, that's what they're spending a lot of their time. But I don't want to speak for them. I'm sure they'll point that out. But it was of great help to the people. And as a result, our landlord tenant rates are lower than they were pre-pandemic.
Thank you. Senator Stallings? Okay. I have a couple questions, and I'm asking this of every head of a department in front of me. So, Mr. Chief Justice, the vacancy rate, we appreciate it's lower than the rest of the state, but still of concern. Appreciate what compounded and got us here, particularly with your workforce. But I'm asking everybody in front of us, what goal should we hold you to when we sit here this time next year? So you're around 7% vacancy now. What's your goal over the next year, and how are you going to achieve it, and how can we help you achieve it?
I don't think we have a specific percentage target, but we certainly aim to fill as many of the vacancies as we can. And we're committed to trying to do that. I don't know if we have a specific ask for that, but I think that what you can certainly expect is that we try as hard as we can. We're currently trying to work. One of the things that Ms. Harris mentioned is issues with alternative work arrangements or those kinds of things. We have a task force that is working on putting together recommendations for what we can do. There are limitations to what we can do because, as she said, people need to be in the courthouses to accept things and to deal with people coming in. So we don't have as much flexibility as some other employers do to offer full-time remote work, but we're trying to figure out what we can do in order to improve recruitment and retention of individuals, and to look more broadly at our workforce to figure out what we can do to bring new people in.
We've also expanded, I think in your package, you will see that we've expanded all of the places we think that we can advertise to normally. And then for certain positions, we're advertising in various, matter of fact, we just had a meeting yesterday talking about how we could possibly get to California to pull some of the programmers that have been laid off from all the different IT divisions. So we're trying to think outside of the box to be able to pull people in.
My personal goal is to not let Miss Harris retire in May so that we keep our turnover rates lower than we have to.
We can appreciate that. Senator Rosebud, I assume you have a piggyback to my question.
Do,
Okay.
what percentage of your workers now are remote?
We'd have to look at that. We allow right now, if you can, 1 day a week. So I can pull those numbers for you to get you those numbers to see how many people are doing that.
So everyone is in the office 4 days a week and some people are out of the office 1 day a week. Is that the way to think about it?
Correct.
Right, that was the judiciary's policy prior to the pandemic, was to allow a maximum of 1 day per week. And the work group is looking at that and figuring out what our policy should be going forward. But yes, we do not have anybody who's fully remote. And it relates to, you know, the services we provide.
I can understand that. Could you provide us with a breakout of occupations of the 4,500 as to who are doing what?
Well, I could see what we could do. We have an EEOC report that we file every year that is broken down by job descriptions in there, how they describe jobs.
Okay, well, whatever you have. I mean,
Okay.
how many
What was
judges,
it?
how many non-judge lawyers, how many
Yeah.
customer service people, how many, whatever it is, just would appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I have two more questions. A similar goal for, let's talk about average case processing time. Appreciating that you had a backlog from 2019, 2020, 21, I assume. Do you anticipate that processing time going down now that you've tackled a lot of the backlog from COVID?
Absolutely, we expect it to go down. That's something that is very important. It's a major project that we're working on. It is it's a different issue in different jurisdictions across the state, just by the nature of how much of a backlog they accrued, how easy or not easy it has been with their physical space in order to have jury trials proceed, and how they've prioritized different kinds of cases coming through. So there are different challenges in different jurisdictions, but all of them are working hard to eliminate the backlogs that have accrued and to reduce that processing time.
Do you have any goals that we should hold you to this time next year? When we
I
meet?
mean, my goal, of course, is to eliminate the backlog. There are, you know, we have other things going on, like transitions to MDEC and things like that that are challenges to that. But I mean, we intend to substantially reduce the backlogs, and that's a big priority of mine.
We appreciate that. And we also appreciate, and I've said this to everybody new here, you're still relatively new, we can say. You inherited a lot of these challenges, and we appreciate that. We just want to be your partners in solving them.
Thank you.
My last question is related to the fiscal 24 certified report on the 7 judgeships. Can you, and I know that we have the report, but just for the purposes of the public, can you expand a little bit on why you only requested 1 judge and 1 magistrate?
Sure, that's in Baltimore County. It's a jurisdiction that has a demonstrated need for more assistance, and also the both the physical ability to accommodate them, as well as local support for the positions that would be needed to support them. The other jurisdictions, it's a combination of challenges with, if there's not an office to put somebody in, then you can't fill that spot, and that is something that we encounter in especially aging courthouse facilities. And some of them are able to get help or assistance from other places or from senior judges, but a lot of it relates to the lack of either physical space or ability to support them and bring those officers on.
And for the district court, Senator, it's for example, Washington County, we have a capital project to put a third courtroom on, and I'm waiting until I know I can project the date. Hopefully it'll be next session, and I'd appreciate your support on that. But there are others like Wacomico County. Because of the seasonal influx in Ocean City, their work patterns are different than anywhere else in the state. And I'm able to, because we're a statewide system, I can take the judge there in kind of these months that are slower in Ocean City and move them to Salisbury so that they can accomplish that. So even though the report on that particular case shows a need of one judge, I wouldn't request that because we're accommodating it through the system right now.
And that makes sense. And I think, thank you, Chief Judge Morrissey, because you got my next suggestion, which is we just stay in close touch, particularly between this subcommittee and the capital budget subcommittee, because it's going to take both of the subcommittees to solve this problem together. Any closing thoughts for us? I see no other questions. Okay. Thank you very much. We
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
very
And
much.
have a
We
lovely
appreciate it.
weekend. Okay, one down. Next, we have the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and we have Samantha, our analyst. Just take a minute to get this up. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Just a reminder about the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. It was reestablished as from MEMA, Maryland Emergency Management Association or Administration Agency. Thank you. I'm stuck with MDEM, the management at the moment. In October of 2021. So that was within the fiscal year 2022. So as you are looking back on the history, keep that in mind and moving forward, because it was in, did cause some like disconnect in closeout for the past year. Moving on to the fiscal year 2024. The operating budget summary. Fiscal 2024 increases from fiscal 2023 by currently or in the published budget by 529.3 million, or almost 137% to 916 million. But this is overstated while a recent budget amendment is still being processed, and I understand is about to be signed and finalized. Which would add a total of nearly 284 million to the fiscal 2023 budget. And that would reduce the overall budget change to approximately 245 million, or an actual increase of 36.6% on the previous year.
Samantha, I'm going to pause you just for 1 minute. Anybody who has a physical copy, we unfortunately have the physical copies are from 2022. Not the current budget. It will be on your floor laptops, but we're going to try to track down some physical copies of FY24's budget.
Okay. So the increases, right, are primarily from the increased disaster grant amounts, which will take up 75% of the budget, while the most of the rest of the budget is consumed by the 911 grant and ongoing other grants, such as the AMOS fund and VCAF and then otherwise personnel and operating expenses. Other large changes result from chapters, let's see. Chapters 241 and 243 of 2022, which established the Cyber Preparedness Unit and provided new guidance on cybersecurity and water and sewer infrastructure. That involved adding 6 new regular positions and 4 new contractual positions for the Cyber Office and the Office of Resilience. All right. Moving on more specifically to the cybersecurity funding. Again, 241 established the cyber preparedness unit, and 243 the local cybersecurity support fund. 7.2 million allotted to that in the new budget. Fiscal notes reports also that for those bills reports that there's a $200 million block in the dedicated purpose account specifically for cybersecurity. So we requested MDEM comment on how they plan to be coordinating with DoIT in use of the new cybersecurity funds and in sharing responsibilities, and whether there are plans to draw from the dedicated purpose account specifically for cybersecurity. Moving on to Mesonet. Pretty straightforward. The project started this past year. It's a network, or it has been in development for a couple of years, but started being built this past year. It's a network of weather towers to provide new data for severe storm and flooding preparedness. But because it's not a capital project or an IT project, there isn't a project tracking mechanism for us or the public to keep track of project expenses and progress. So we recommended committee narrative to request a report later this year on the status of the project, including budgetary and operational history and future plans. Moving on to the issues, federal disaster grants. Again, those increased by quite a lot this year. Increases of nearly 58% after accounting for the fiscal 2023 budget amendment. So that leaves a total of 680 million at nearly a 250 million increase. And then in the analysis, we also provide a table of how the existing disaster grant funds were distributed across jurisdictions as of December 2022, as provided by MDEM in December. But we've requested that MDEM comment on whether the new disaster funding accounts for claims already submitted, or whether the new block, what the increase is accounting for claims that are already submitted, or whether that is an estimate based off of claims that are anticipated or applications that are anticipated. Moving on to the 911 board. The current statute provides that the surcharge is 50 cents per line as the state share, and up to $1.50 for the county share. And that varies across counties, again, but up to $1.50. So the maximum amount for a given jurisdiction being $2 per line. Last year's JCR requested that that the surcharge revenue and distribution be reported in the budget, with the budget and in the managing for results data. And so we have that this year. But there has been at least one question about the accuracy of the new report and the distribution of funds across counties. MDEM reported in October that there was difficulty obtaining estimates of the amounts due to phone service carriers considering the number of lines they have open in a jurisdiction to be private information. So we've requested MDM comment on whether that problem has been resolved and whether they have a timeline for receiving the data each year. And we've requested commentary on how the county level surcharge rates are decided and how the funding amounts reported in the MFR, the current, what was reported in the recent MFR and in the budget books, how that was decided and how the funding amounts, how the surcharge per county level was decided and how the amounts were distributed. Finally, another pretty straightforward one. From the MFR data, we have the MFR data reports emergency management courses held and large-scale exercises conducted. And we noticed that since the pandemic, that probably for understandable reasons, the number of courses that were held decreased significantly, but it hasn't gone up yet. But at the same time, the number of large-scale exercises has increased, nearly double since 2020. So we've asked for commentary on whether this is a shift in agenda or priorities at MDM, or whether for the foreseeable future, and whether there are plans to return to pre-pandemic trends in terms of management, emergency management courses hosted. Other than that, in the analysis, we have summaries of the JCR reports that were submitted in the first half of fiscal 2023. And then otherwise, we concur with the governor's budget. That I can take questions, or you can take questions with the agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Apologies for the snafu. We now have physical copies, but we're also going to have the same issue with the WMATA budget. Just a heads up, Deneen's working on it for us. Questions for Samantha? So I do have one on the 911 telephone surcharge. Just looking at, there's some interesting swings between 2020 and 2022 in particular. Just taking my jurisdiction, for instance, 2020, just under 4,000, 2021, 6,200 in thousands, and then 2022, the 63. How do we explain those swings? And it looks like several counties have significant swings.
Yes, that's the pretty much the nature of the question for MDM, that's been recognized by other people. It seems volatile.
And I'm going to assume I will hear from my local department about going to be challenging to build a budget around this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions for Samantha? Thank you very much. Okay, with us we have Secretary Strickland. We have Chas Eby, who is Deputy Executive Director, and Janet Montcrieff, Director of Mission Support. Sure. Sorry, we're limited in seats.
No problem.
Start whenever you're ready.
Okay, first off, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us here today. We appreciate the support and the opportunity to update the subcommittee on the department's activities and address the items contained in the operating budget analysis prepared by the Department of Legislative Services. Would particularly like to thank Samantha, as well as our DBM analyst, Rebecca, that's I think is in the back of the room with us, for their many hours and understanding of the fact that we're new to the departmental game, and we're kind of in catch up with all of that. So we greatly appreciate their support and guidance. You've mentioned who I have with us here today. We've submitted written testimony, and we're basically ready to answer any questions that you might have specifically.
Thank you. Could you address this chart we have in front of us?
Let me put my glasses on. Is that the 911?
It is the 911 chart.
Yeah,
yes.
so yes, ma'am. One of the things with that too is the fees may have changed, so the rates may have, the amount of money may have changed as we went through that. The other piece of this is we are having difficulty obtaining some of the data because of privacy issues with the carriers, but we're working on that to see if we can't get that kind of smoothed out and straightened out.
Can you explain? We were all present for the floor debate on these bills or package of bills, but could you explain the process by which the state is actually receiving the surcharge?
So there is yeah, how do I explain this? There is a surcharge on the telephone. And depending upon the county it's in, it's charged 50 cents by the state, and then it can be charged anywhere from 50 cents to $1.50 by the local jurisdiction. So that all gets pulled basically through the comptroller's office, who has the funds, and then we deal with the data that they have for us.
So the money actually never flows through MDEM, it's just going.
Now, I believe it would actually be an action of accounts payable moving it. I mean, it comes into our budget and then no, I'm sorry. So on your question, I'm still trying to follow the tracking of it. Yes, it does come into us.
Okay.
And then through our accounts payable, we issue the action so that it goes to the local jurisdiction.
Okay. And I understand privacy challenges, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around the incredible I mean, it's significant volatility between years and jurisdictions, and even accounting for population sizes. So that's what I'm struggling with.
Well, and I think part of that too goes to the fact that each jurisdiction can set that rate, that local rate, and that has changed over the years.
Okay. Okay, I think we might need to dig a little more together on this issue.
We can do that.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Having sat on the 911 board, I certainly am a little familiar with this. And let's take one of my 3 counties, for instance. Prince George's County has 27 municipalities. So those numbers can be volatile. And it's something that we talked about during those proceedings. But if you could, as the chair mentioned, kind of work with us on this and let us know how we can help, whether we're talking to MACO or MML, and just kind of, the numbers are pretty scary, that volatility, so we can kind of get a handle on it.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Appreciating the volatility, can you speak to maybe the 2022 funds awarded were about 41 million, but our 2023 estimated is 28 million?
Again, that's the data that's coming in from the local jurisdictions.
Okay.
And whether or not they're rating, and we'd have to go down through whether or not they have raised or lowered their surcharge.
Okay. I think the subcommittee is going to need to ruminate on this one and work with you to figure it out.
Appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you all very much.
That's it.
I think that's it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's it.
easy.
You're being gentle. Thank you. All right.
New department, easy hearing.
I would like to speak to the senator in the fact that the challenges that have been going on in Baltimore County the last couple of days. And I will commend not only their law enforcement agency, but also their emergency management. And their director of emergency management was on the phone with me last night, let me know as things were moving from Baltimore County into Harford County. So again, our thoughts are with you all.
Thank you very much. We talked today with the Baltimore County executive. We know that he, the county executive and the governor will be there. We're just happy to know that I was told my chair, one of the officers are home.
Yes, good.
But the other we're praying
Yeah,
for
the
their
others,
families,
yes.
but it was a tough
long
past 2
road.
days. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think that emergencies my district has faced all speaks to why you are now our department.
Yes.
So that you can coordinate with our locals and bring the resources of the state. So we appreciate all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Okay, next up, we have MDOT WMATA operating budget. We're joined by Stephen McCulloch. Stephen, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Steve McCulloch with Department of Legislative Services, here to present the WMATA analysis. And just as a reminder, this analysis talks about the Maryland commitment to WMATA. So the budget for the operating and the capital grants, but a lot of the analysis you'll be hearing is on the actual WMATA budget to explain how the Maryland contribution, gets constructed. So starting with that, looking at the operating budget summary, this is only the Maryland portion. So you can see that the increase of 1% or $4.8 million over the current year to a total of $467 million for the Maryland operating subsidy. Looking at the PAYGO capital subsidy, again, this is just Maryland contribution towards the WMATA capital budget. Totals $350.2 million in 2024, which is a 35.4 million, a 35.4% increase. Turning now to the first exhibit 1 on page 5. This is showing the effect of the COVID pandemic on the WMATA services for both Metro Bus at the top and Metro Rail on the bottom of that. So each of the lines represents a year. 2019 is the blue line at the top of each chart. And then you see that in each successive year, 20, 21, and 22, service levels have, ridership has increased, but is still well below that 2019 level. Looking now at the managing for results indicators, the first one is ridership. This time it's on the fiscal year basis, but you can see that same trend where 2020, which had just a little bit of the pandemic effect at the end of that fiscal year, was lower. 2021 very low, and you can see that in the 2 years since, things have been trending back upwards. That translates into exhibit 3 on page 7, the performance indicators, where it looks at revenue miles, passengers per revenue mile, the operating costs per revenue mile, and the operating cost per passenger trip. And as you can imagine, the drop in ridership has increased expenses per passenger and revenue mile. But in the 2022, there has been improvement. You see the big bars in 2021 and then decreases on those in 2022. Looking at exhibit 4 on page 8, this is the fare box recovery. And again, directly related to the drop in ridership. You can see the level of fare box recovery, and the line is for system-wide. Each of the bars has a different service type, but you can see it's much lower. And that will tie in to the one of the issues we'll be discussing in just a few moments. Turning now to the operating budget, or an overview actually of both budgets. This agency spending chart shows both the capital and the operating total budget for WMATA for fiscal 2024, and then breaks out the Maryland share. So you can see from here that Maryland's share of the capital budget in 2024 is expected to be 14.5%, with the Maryland share of the operating just under 20.5%. Some of the operating budget assumptions that underlie the WMATA budget, the use of $561 million in federal stimulus funding, that's actually a decrease, and this does represent the final year of federal stimulus funding available to WMATA and transit systems across the United States are likely using up their the final amounts in their 2024 budgets. There is expectation of increased both revenue from passenger revenue and non-revenue income. The system is implementing kind of cost savings to bring down the budget, total budget costs. There are fare optimization changes proposed, which will expect to increase revenues. And then there are increasing the amount allocated for preventative maintenance to the capital budget. So under the federal aid, certain categories of expenditure that would be considered operating maintenance can be transferred to the capital budget, and that does increase in the 2024 proposed budget to $139 million from the current year of 60. So that's one way they're closing that gap. And then the operation of 2024 also assumes service optimization and changing frequencies as ridership is rising. They are trying to provide more frequent service in, the core, especially in order to attract and continue to attract ridership. Looking now at the operating budget by expense category, you can see that personnel expenses are the largest share, as for many state agencies. Personnel expenses equate to about 68% in the allowance. And you can see some of the large changes in fuel and utilities and propulsion. Those reflect both the increased service that's included in the budget, as well as reflecting the effect of inflation that are affecting a lot of budgets. Exhibit 7 on page 12 shows the operating revenues the revenues that support the operating budget. Now the subsidy, which is shown in blue and is provided by Maryland, Virginia, and the District of Columbia, makes up the difference between what the total operating budget cost is for a year and what the system can raise through fares and other parking and other types of revenues. And also for the last few years, the federal aid that's come in lieu of, to help replace some of that. And in fiscal 2024, the total operating subsidy from the 3 jurisdictions equates to almost 54% of total expected costs. Looking at the PAYGO capital program, just note that the PAYGO capital funding is derived slightly differently. There's no kind of formula, there's no mandated amount based on what the capital program is. Rather, it is a funding agreement that is worked out between WMATA and its funding jurisdictions. Typically, there are a 5 or 6 year funding agreement. The current one goes through June 30th of 2027. So they, have certainty over the next few years as to what their capital funding levels will be. For Maryland, many of you will recall in 2018, the General Assembly passed a statute that guaranteed what's called the governor's dedicated grant. In total, that's $500 million to WMATA from the 3 jurisdictions. The intent was to help bring the system up to a state of good repair. In Maryland, that amount is $167 million annually, and that is a mandated amount. That 2018 legislation also established procedures whereby the base capital that's provided by the jurisdictions could also become a mandated appropriation. That was subject to WMATA supplying data and audit reports, to the jurisdictions in advance of the beginning of the fiscal year. 2024 will be the second year that base capital amount is mandated because they did provide the information required and it was certified before the beginning of the fiscal year. Exhibit 8 on page 14 shows the Maryland CTP components of the grant going to WMATA. You see the top line is the biggest, is just the general capital investment. The second line, project development, is a small amount, but that's like the Maryland Development and Evaluation Program in the CTP that queues up projects for the future to be added. And then there's matching funds for the federal aid that comes in. The federal government provides $150 million per year, and that's matched by 1/3 each of the jurisdictions. You'll see at the bottom of this, the base capital grant, and shows the 3%. The legislation 2018 did say that in any year that the base capital is a mandated appropriation, it should increase by 3% over the previous year. The numbers you see here are derived, basically sums the first 3 lines and subtracts out the federal funds that are received directly by WMATA. So that's where those numbers come from. The 6-year program that WMATA has for its capital outlook totals $14.4 billion. And you can see that the local funding partners are projected to provide about 40% of that through that agreement that I mentioned just a moment ago. The federal government picks up about just over 25%, and then debt is the remaining 1/3 of that expected funding. 2024 capital budget totals $2.4 billion. And you can see on Exhibit 10 on page 16, the categories that go into that request. Looking at Exhibit 11, this shows the funding sources for the 2024 capital program, and it breaks it out by the federal formula program. The 144 is showing here. I said 150 rail improvement and investment improvement act that the state matches. And in the right-hand column, you see the Maryland match for each of those components for a total in the Maryland budget of $347 million in the capital grant program for the allowance. We show the difference between what WMATA shows in its proposed budget and what Maryland has in its budget, just as an explanation that there are always small differences that's determined or caused by timing issues. The Maryland budget's put together prior to the introduction of the proposed WMATA budget. The other thing that is now since the 2018 legislation, which caps the increase in the WMATA operating budget at 3%, but that excludes, certain items. And so Maryland's practice is that the MDOT does not include those excluded items in the allowance. And then once the budgets are approved by the WMATA board, on which Maryland has a voting member, the Maryland grant is trued up to either increase or decrease based on that approved budget. New this year, we've been asked about the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission budget. The Safety Commission is the state oversight agency for WMATA, ensuring that the rail system is operated in a safe manner. The budget for that is shared very much like the it's shared amongst the three jurisdictions actually on a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 basis. Maryland budgets its portion of that within that WMATA operating grant. So it is kind of appropriate to show here. This is just for, purposes of referring to if you have interest in what makes up that budget. It's a small agency, 20 current full-time employees. The 2024 budget does anticipate increasing that to 2024. The safety agency does utilize contractual support for a lot of its expertise to address safety items. There's that. So the first issue begins on page 21, and this is talking about an issue that's facing agencies across the nation, and that's the fiscal cliff that is approaching when these federal relief funds that have been in the budget for the last few years go away. The Exhibit 14 on that page 21 shows the long-term budget outlook, and you can see that in the green here is the federal aid. It ends at the end of 2024, and you see going forward there, the blue line is the projected expenditures, and the orange line is the the revenue coming in. So in 2025, WMATA is currently projecting a gap in 2025 of $738 million, and that increases, as you can see, in 2029 to just under $1 billion. And we've asked both WMATA and MDOT to comment on what the plan is going forward, whether service, adjusting service levels are going to be part of that equation, or how it expects to deal with that. The second issue on page 22 is the return to service of the 7000 series rail cars. I'm sure all aware that after a derailment on the blue line, these cars were pulled from service. They've started coming back in with inspections required, and the frequency of some of those inspections is what has prevented WMATA from being able to fully return it yet. But in January, it did receive permission from the safety agency to increase the interval on the older 7000 series cars to 7 days presuming that, there are at least four inspections that don't show any problems cropping up in that service interval. But that has allowed the agency to this week actually start increasing service levels and with more cars coming into service. I'll note that the 2024 budget does assume full return to service of the full fleet for 7,000. So GM can probably comment on that. The operating budget and capital budget recommendations shown on 23 is to both concur with the governor's allowance.
Thank you, Steve. Questions for our analyst? Okay, seeing none, we're happy to have Mr. Randy Clark, General Manager of WMATA, and Ms. Samantha Biddle, Chief of Staff to MDOT. And just so the subcommittee knows, our new Secretary of MDOT wishes he could be here. He had a longstanding vacation planned before he knew he was taking the job with family. So we understand and hope he's having a good time without us. Okay. Whoever would like to start.
I'll go ahead. Good afternoon, Chair Alfred and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Samantha Biddle, Chief of Staff for the Maryland Department of Transportation. As the chair referenced, our acting secretary, Paul Wiedefield, does send his regrets and wishes that he could be here with you today. As you know, MDOT does have a total of 10 budget hearings in front of this committee, so he looks forward to meeting with you at all of the remaining hearings. It's a pleasure to be before you today to discuss the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, or WMATA. I would first like to, as always, thank our analyst, Steve McCullough, for his professionalism and partnership throughout the year. We've seen a lot of change at WMATA over the last year. In addition to seeing transit ridership begin to return in the National Capital Region, WMATA also has new leadership, including a new general manager and CEO, with whom I have the pleasure of being here today. The state remains committed to ensuring a safe and reliable transit system in the National Capital Region for Maryland citizens and for all of the riders of the WMATA system. This is why we and our partners in the Commonwealth of Virginia and the District of Columbia continue to invest significant public funding to subsidize the operating and capital budgets for Metro Rail, Metro Bus, and WMATA's paratransit service, Metro Access. This includes our share of the dedicated capital funding grant, which provides WMATA with $500 million annually to support additional debt issued to enhance WMATA's capital program. These funds help address WMATA's needs to make critical capital and infrastructure improvements. Hundreds of thousands of Marylanders rely on WMATA's transit offerings for their transportation needs. It's important for the state to help ensure these citizens, as well as others who live throughout the National Capital Region, have access to safe and reliable transit system to get them to work, doctor's appointments, the grocery store, or wherever else life takes them. I'm now pleased to introduce one of WMATA's newest additions, Mr. Randy Clark, joining WMATA in August of 2022. He's the new general manager and chief executive officer. MDOT looks forward to working closely with Mr. Clark and his team as we all work to ensure a safe and reliable transit system in the National Capital Region.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. Appreciate the invitation and the time. I'll start off with, it's a pleasure to be with Chief Staff Biddle today and look forward, obviously, the acting secretary used to have this role, so obviously knows Metro very well. Look forward to working with the secretary when he's officially confirmed. I also want to thank the analysts as well. I gotta say, you do that much better than I could ever do, and I might take you on a roadshow a little bit to explain I think everyone knows the complications of the Metro budget and the multi-jurisdictional way we're put together. So I very much appreciate your analysis. As the Chief of Staff said, while I'm new to Metro, I'm certainly not new to transit. I've dedicated my professional life to transit. That's all I've ever been in. I'm really committed to the safe, reliable, equitable service that transit delivers to communities. I'm a daily transit user. Yesterday, I did 6 trips on the system. Today, I have 1 in. It doesn't make it to Annapolis. Maybe that would be a long-term goal for all of us because it is actually very, very beautiful in Annapolis. But I am a daily user of the system. I've joked publicly before, my wife is a user of the system. So there's a high threshold to meet when I go home every night that service is running well. Before I had the opportunity to be the Metro General Manager, I was the CEO of Transit System in Austin, Texas, where not only do we have a transit system, but we won a very large referendum to build a whole new and quite much larger system there. I've had senior leadership positions at APTA, which is the American Public Transportation Association. So I actually lived in DC for a couple of years before I went to Texas, and at the MBTA in Boston, a senior leadership position there as well. So transit is kind of in my blood and what I do professionally. Before addressing our budget, I just want to take a quick moment and I think it's really important from a timing point of view, address the senseless murder of one of our employees last week. Mr. Robert Cunningham was one of our dedicated employees, a 20-year veteran of Metro. And Mr. Cunningham decided to put his life at risk and intercede in a dangerous gunman that was in the streets of the city, ended up on a bus, ended up at a rail station. It certainly wasn't a Metro-specific incident as much as it was another tragic gun violence incident in America that happened to drift into the Metro system. I just think it's really important right now that we recognize the heroic action that our employee did, and quite frankly, then another employee and the customers, and preventing a lot more tragic death. Mr. Cunningham has a funeral next week. We are doing everything we can to support the family, and I just want to highlight the deep appreciation from Metro, on behalf of Metro, of all the outpouring of support and care. The GoFundMe page for Mr. Cunningham, I think, is better part of $200,000 that the community has put towards that, but also just the care for the family and other Metro employees. It has really been appreciated deeply. It's been a challenging time, but I am just inspired by the resilience of our team going through that. The next piece I kind of wanted to address is, kind of turning into where the system is right now. And I think you got, again, a really detailed analysis done for you, but a couple of things I want to highlight. So rail is really, a big driver of part of the regional economy, as well as the bus system. And to me, I want to measure what we're doing well by customer satisfaction, how people think we're doing well. So it'd be like, if you ran a coffee shop, you want people to buy coffee and you want them to say that you're really great at selling coffee. So in July, we had a customer satisfaction rating of 66% on the rail system. And at our end of our quarter report at the end of December, we were at 79%. So a 13% gain in customer satisfaction in 6 months. On the bus side, we rose almost 6 points to 75%. So we are just under our historic highs of customer satisfaction. That doesn't mean we don't have work to do, but I think we're going in the right direction, or at least the customers feel like we're going in the right direction. As of this week, and I appreciate you mentioning the more service that we announced this week, we are operating 41% more service than we were in July. So a significant amount more rail service. On Wednesday was our second highest ridership day since the pandemic. And we expect, as we continue to increase service, we're past the holidays, we're getting almost into tourist season and other things, we expect ridership to continue to grow from there. But all of this comes together, which is safe, frequent, reliable service is what the customers want. And that's what we're focused on. On the bus side, Metro celebrates 50 years of Metro Bus, actually this week, and we're doing some big celebrations at the end of next week. But one of the big things we're working on is our bus network redesign project. And what that really means is a lot of our bus routes kind of look and feel the same that they've done for 30, 40 years. So one of our peers actually here at MTA and the greater Baltimore area, they did a network redesign years ago, significantly improved the system, made it much more cost efficient, but actually provided much better service to people in the community. So that's what Metro is kind of embarking on right now. We've engaged over 12,000 people on that. Something like 5,500 surveys have already been completed. We're really trying to do it in a very community-centric, customer-centric way, not just a bunch of people in an ivory tower saying what it should be. What do people on the street need for better service? So I'm pleased the way that's going. Our goal is to roll that network out in 2024. Of course, that is based a little bit on our budget, and because we can have a kind of a no more resource constrained network, or we can have a more of an aspirational what people truly want. Most people want more frequency on the bus side. That's the general rule on the bus side. Speaking of the budget, as you heard earlier, we have a $2.3 billion proposed operating budget, includes $561 million of the COVID relief money. It is the last year of that funding. We had a $150 million deficit back in July, and we have closed that. It was actually a little bit higher than 150. And we have closed that. I will say we probably used up all of the tools in the toolbox to do that. And we tried to really work through that. So we as a region would have the space and time to come together collaboratively to figure out how we're going to have a longer term investment plan for Metro. And I use investment really versus funding in a lot of ways, because that's what it is. The region has invested, well over $100 billion over the last generation or so to build Metro. We just opened the Silver Line to Dulles. Lots of other people want to connect other parts of the system. We now got to figure out how we're going to operate that system. I made a public reference before. I have a report on my desk from 1975 that was given to me when I got this job from someone that was involved in the federal government back in the 70s. And in the report, it literally at the bottom says, if we do not solve Metro's long-term funding, we are going to have an ongoing disaster for the National Capital Region. And so while it maybe hasn't been a disaster, it has been a Band-Aid approach for over 40 years. And everyone kind of knows that approach has happened. We're a very unique transit agency where we don't have our own funding source because of this we'll say in the sake of here of the DC's estate, a tri-state kind of compact plus the federal government. And so there's been great work done. I very much appreciate the work done out of this body and the leadership in the state of Maryland in 2018 for the capital funding. But even that funding by 29-ish, that capital funding will only be enough in relative dollar value to support debt financing, and we will not be able to continue to do other capital projects. They'll just kind of deplete from there. It's kind of sad in one way to say, but $500 million in 2023 doesn't get you what $500 million met in 2018. I think we all kind of feel that on an individual level, but trying to kind of be very transparent and public about what that looks like. On our budget for this year, we're looking at a couple things, and quite frankly, there's a few things that really are, I think, beneficial in Maryland. $2 base rail fare. We want to get rid of the peak off peak. It's very confusing. It's not simple. This will allow more people to seamlessly use the system. It aligns with our weekend and night fare, which is $2, which has been really valuable. And it's certainly an increase from an equitable point of view as well. The average fare increase will probably be about 5%. Now I want to highlight it's not monolithic, because we're also introducing a low income fare program. And the idea is if you're on SNAP qualifications, you would get a 50% reduction in fare. We're one of the last larger agencies to try to move something like that along. The idea is how do we ensure the people that are the most transit dependent, that need transit services, to be the most equitable that way. When you put it all together, there's some people that will have reduced fares, some people have a little bit more. It's a kind of a cleanup to say this system's been in place for about 40 years. The model's kind of different as we move as a region. How do we have something that's simpler, cleaner, more easy to understand, and kind of lean in and help people that need it the most? We are doing budget hearings, and they'll wrap up by early March, and then the board would take action. Our fiscal year starts on July 1st. On the capital side, $2.2 billion for FY24 capital budget. As you heard, $12.4 billion for the 6-year plan. I mentioned the great capital work that was done and where that will sunset. A couple of the upcoming projects will be the 8000 series rail cars built in Maryland, which is a big deal. I'm excited about that. We did a groundbreaking back in, I guess it was about October-ish. I apologize. It's been a 6-month window that every day is like, there's a reason Groundhog Day, that term exists. It's kind of, I don't know if I've been here for 6 years or 6 days sometimes. So I can't remember the exact date, but that is a big exciting piece. Really significant continuing investigation on our escalators and elevator program. And that's not just important just from accessibility, but there's a safety component, state of good repair. We're actually building a new heavy rail vehicle overhaul facility, also in Maryland, over by our Carmen Turner facility up in that area. And of course, it's our bus garages, both state of good repair, but moving to zero emission and modernizing Metro. So I want to just highlight a couple of those things. With that, I just wanted one more thing I want to highlight is that Metro is going through a strategic plan. And one thing I think is incredibly important about strategic plan is that you hear from people, so we can get this region all grounded what people want Metro to be, right? Everyone has a different lens on that. So we have a 5-year plan. It's called Your Metro, the Way Forward. We actually had a public hearing last night. Very transparent, approach driven. Lots of community feedback, lots of individual surveys, lots of workforce, of which, about 70% of our workforce actually lives in Maryland. We really want to engage our employees to be, employer of choice, make careers, not jobs. That's how we can have an empower culture, a whole safety-based culture, really trying to say what we do well. The part that I'm really excited about is the transparency that of having KPIs that are publicly shown and showing our dashboard. Some things we're doing really well, the things we're not doing well, we publicly say we're not doing well, and then you move and you corrective action and you move on. And that's kind of a little bit of the culture we really want to work on, is this continuous improvement. And to do that, we got to be willing to show where we're not doing well and just be open about that. We're all humans. We're going to make mistakes. But at the same time, I think we'll get a lot more grace and leeway from people when we're just open about it, and it gives us the space to actually get better. So with that, Chair, those are the comments from Metro. And again, I appreciate, this is my first chance to be with you all, and I appreciate the opportunity.
You've packed a lot into the last 10 minutes and a lot in the last 6 months, and we appreciate that. Senator Jackson.
Yeah, absolutely. You packed a lot in the last 10 minutes, so you answered most of my questions. So, but welcome, first of all. Secondly, I love the concept and your enthusiasm regarding expanding and meeting the needs of our citizens. So you know, I mean, we're just meeting, but I represent Southern Prince George's, part of Charles County, part of Calvert County. I'm sure you've already heard.
I have, sir. I think I know where you're going, Senator.
You'll continue to hear that. But I'll leave it there, and we look forward to working with you. I love the fact that you all have a transparent strategic plan, which is great. Please include us as you're growing in the direction, and however we can help you, let us know. This committee, you'll find, it's here to work with you as we meet the needs of our customers. Because our customers can't get where they need to go, then the entire whomever said what they said to you, and or that document you read about the system itself, and we can't get beyond ourselves, we're going to have a challenge. The National Capital Region is growing, is expanding. And so the growth of is moving southeast. And so we'll be talking further. And one question, your staffing and it's the impact during the COVID period. And as you're rebuilding the system, we use the system often. So how has that affected your staffing going forward?
Yeah, well, great question, Senator. Look forward to future discussions. I have heard from some county officials in Charles County about that. So, and I'm sure MDOT and us will all work collaboratively moving that forward. On the staffing, I think that's a critical point. So most industries have some staffing issues. Transit, I think, is really acute in that area. I'm sure you'll hear from Maryland, Holly and Maryland MTA on similar. I am really proud of how focused we got as a team. One of the most important things in our strategic plan is talent. We literally laid out a category of talent and how we not only hire, recruit and hire, but retain and build the competencies, not just checking boxes of training, but really get people invested in the type of job they have. So right now we've come a fair amount of way. In July, we had over 1,800 vacancies, and now we are just over 1,300. So last year we hired and certified 300 bus operators. We are now in our industry what we call drop trips. So basically meaning a trip that's scheduled to run on bus that doesn't actually run. And that could happen from a mechanical reason or a staffing reason. Staffing making up the majority probably in our industry right now. We've come a long way. We're down a lot of days to about 1%, which is what Metro would do before the pandemic. Our staffing has come a long way. The way our system works though, people get pulled to rail from bus. It's just the way the collective bargaining agreement works. And so we are still short on the rail side, but every day we are working to close that. So a good example, I had a meeting this morning in our signals department, which is probably the most technically driven group and the hardest to retain and skill. We are at 100%. So I'm really proud of how far we've come. We're still short on the police side. We're down about 80 police officers. That is a significant issue we were dealing with in the system, but it's a laser focus of the agency. So thank you for the question, Senator.
No, I appreciate that. Part of that question was lending to MPD coming on to help you all out in your efforts. And you've only heard from one of those regions so far. I'm part of three of them, but Prince George's is next for you, so.
Sir.
Stand by. Thank you.
Thank you. And you've opened the door. So now I'm going to ask you about vacancy rates and where you would like to be next year. We have a little less oversight over these things, but just curious what you closed some of the gap. Where do you expect to be this time next year?
Yeah, so great question, Senator. So we in the budget process, we did reduce headcount. Now, I think we still got some efficiencies, probably to squeeze out of Metro, but we don't have 1,300 vacancies to squeeze out of Metro, obviously. So part of it is we don't want to lose anymore. That's a big piece. We have an aging workforce, the type of industry we are. So not losing is sometimes winning in certain parts of our workforce. But we definitely want to get, and part of this, I was like, Senator, not to try to talk around it, is what is the service plan going to look like with the budget year coming up in FY25? We don't want to go hire 700-800 people and then 3 months later lay off 700-800 people, let alone probably 2,000 more, because we're talking draconian cuts in FY25. Like $750 million for us. The only thing that we really can control is staff from a cost point of view, and staffing service. We're talking big cuts of service. So assuming we don't get to that, we want to be strategic on how we roll out hiring. So our goal is to get all of our safety critical departments, number one, fully staffed. And then how do we make sure our support departments, which are also very critical, things like IT, we are struggling with IT. We use a lot of contractors that I think in some ways that's good. In other ways, we want to have more in-house staff. We're also struggling a little bit with some financial, like accounting and things of that nature, stuff that basically every other organization is struggling with. So I don't have a per se exact number. Our talent plan that we'd look to finalize probably in the next 2 months, we'll get into actual KPI markers on each individual type of topic, because they're not really monolithic. So hopefully that answers the questions.
That's helpful. Thank you. I'm going to go to Senator Rosebud, but then I would love for you to address the financial cliff of FY25.
Sure.
So we don't have this we're going to have the conversation next year, but we need to prepare for it. Senator Rosebud.
Thank you. I actually was going to touch a little bit on the financial cliff issue in a broader context, though. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression, I've lived in the Washington area since before Metro was built, and it was designed basically to bring people from the suburbs into the city. And that's the way it was laid out. It's changed in some ways, but that's why over the past 20 years in Maryland, we pushed so hard for the Purple Line to get connectivity in rail between suburbs and not just into the city. Obviously, a huge impact of COVID was the move for people not to come to the office. And my business office is in DC, and I mostly work from home now. And whenever I go into the office, I continue to be stunned by how empty downtown DC is. So part of that is people traveling less. Part of that is, but a lot of it is people commuting less. And you know the data better than I do, and you have experience around the country. I'd like you to address the big picture issue of how a rail system, in particular, because obviously buses, you can change the routes, but hard to change the rail routes, is how are you all thinking about the big picture, long-term problem of whether we build a great system for the 20th century and it ain't going to be so great for the 21st century?
Yeah, well, great question. And I think this will be one of many conversations, I think, on this topic.
I agree,
Senator.
but I want to get it started.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I guess my first initial reaction would be, where you see that as a challenge, I see it as an enormous opportunity. And I say that because our world is changing, and therefore Metro has to change to adapt to that world. I've been saying this a long time, long before COVID in the transit industry, that we need to operate like a service that you could take at any time of day, depending on any type of trip you use, and not just be a commuter-centric business. And so the uniqueness of Metro, and you highlight this very well, is we're some ways an urban subway system, in some ways a commuter rail. And the builders kind of try to put Humpty Dumpty together with both. So we're not like New York City Transit or MBTA in Boston, but we're also not a full commuter rail. So we serve a lot of different types of trips. And I think Metro is adapting, and what I want to do is adapt. And you'll see in our FY24 budget proposal, a good example, we want to double the trains on the Green Line to Branch Ave. So not only is that kind of a part of the region that has not had as much opportunity over time, it is where a lot of ridership exists because a lot of individuals still don't do office jobs per se and still travel extensively. I live in DC at the moment. There are parts that are kind of, you say quiet. There are other parts that are incredibly active. So Foggy Bottom Station, you would feel like it's 2018 every single day because of the hospital. And that hospital is not going anywhere. If you went to the Navy Yard on Friday night, you would be blown away by how busy it is. We have a lot of people now that do different kind of commuter trips that live in DC or other areas that might go to Tyson's. We have a lot of people that use the King Street area because it's an activity center. Bethesda is very, very busy. New Carrollton, we think, is going to be long-term an incredibly busy hub. You have Amtrak, you have MARC, you have all of the Prince George's transportation, and then you have us. And we're just about to open a new facility right at the base of the station with 1,000 employees, and there's development all over that area. So I think we need to adapt. We need to be thinking about people that can be car-free and car-light. So if you want to take a trip at 10 a.m. in the morning and go to the doctor, your wait time has to be commensurate to making that use. Same as at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And so I think the whole industry is trying to evolve. The reality is in transit, the cheapest thing you can do in transit is run more service. And it sounds weird to say that because we're the only thing in government that doesn't seem to work that way, right? The more people that use us, we're the only thing in government, the more people use, we become more efficient, right? There's nothing else works that way. If you call the police, it's more ineffective every call they take and on and on and on. So for us, the variable cost of one more train to run is so low, obviously, right? So the investment's there. Now, how do we make sure our travel patterns meet where the future's going? But I'm very bullish with the bus network redesign, plus trying to streamline our, if you will, our fare structure to make it easier to understand, plus these new service levels. Over time, that's going to come. What we have to be honest with is Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are definitely going to be busier than Monday and Fridays. But Fridays, I think you're going to start seeing later on Fridays busier than Friday mornings. But our highest days are always Wednesday now, followed by Tuesday and Thursday. But it is clear, even in DC, it feels different than it is even 4 months ago. It's becoming busier. But the last thing I highlight on that is the ridership. So, we're carrying probably between bus and rail the other day, 650 to 700,000 people. So even if we don't get back to 1.3 million for a while or 1.2 million for a while combined, that's still 700,000 people that we need to provide fantastic service for, right? So the idea of cutting their service isn't going to help that scenario either. And so what we have to kind of figure out is, and I think a more honest conversation about Transit America, which is Metro more than other agencies used to rely on fare box recovery, i.e. the trips, to cover more revenue. Most other agencies in other parts of the country, that was much less. We're drifting more towards that model. And I think we have to have an honest conversation that the idea of Metro back in say 1990 fare box recovery is never coming back. But how do we still keep to that source and then be as cost efficient as possible and think about us as a region, what we want to actually fund?
So the punchline to that, which comes back to the Cliff question, is long-term needing more reliance on revenue sources other than the fare box.
Yes, Senator, there's no question that will be the case. And then above probably my pay grade, but we need to, as I think as a region, to come together and say, what does that look like? Because I personally believe, being in this role for 6 months, running another agency, been around the industry, it's not just money. I think we need to really be honest about the sourcing of money and what we're trying to accomplish. So, and the reason I say that is, and this is, again, large conversation for all the jurisdictions to have. It's Metro in a lot of ways. A big criticism I've heard for a long time is Metro needs to be more strategic, needs to be thinking longer term, get itself organized. It is very hard to do that if you're funding every couple of years. You have to go with a hand out and say, can you fund something? So we have to have an honest conversation of how those two things are linked together. I also hear from a lot of local jurisdictions. This is different in Maryland, especially this is a different conversation in Virginia, which is because the local jurisdictions pay the bill differently than Maryland, which is we need certainty on our financial plans. And therefore, that is disruptive every few years as well. So I think it's going to be a real healthy conversation of what we want to do, plus the capital money, sir.
Let me come back to the reconceptualizing what Metro Rail in particular does, but bus as well. Where are you in the process of actually having a long-term plan that we can look at?
Yeah, great question, Senator. So we are several months away, but that's, you know, our goal is to have something by late spring, worst case summer. And we're gonna basically show 3 scenarios, right? We want to get through this budget.
Yeah, I see.
1, 2, we had to get our trains back running and a bunch of other issues, right? But we're gonna show basically 3 scenarios. 1, you know, the old term of death spiral or whatever term people want to say, which is if we don't fill the gap, this is what the service cuts will look like. B, if we do status quo and, you know, people just go, don't worry, here, we're gonna cut the 750 million and divide it by 3 or 4, and here it is. Here's where we stay. And basically, you know, we are. And here's an aspirational view of what Metro can be, based on what a lot of people in the community said, customers said.
I understand.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
understand.
And so our goal, sir, is to lay
I'm
those
just asking
3
the
out.
timing question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
We'll see that in a couple of months.
Yeah, yeah, by late spring,
By
we
late
should have
spring.
something to kind of socialize.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
I'll turn it back to the chair first, but I want to come back to some other questions on workforce after you're done.
I think we've covered it. You
Okay.
have a plan for a plan, and then we look forward to having the conversation. I think I'm going to suggest to our House colleagues that we come together and when you
Yeah,
have a plan
that's a great idea.
in the late spring, early summer, just so we can start the
That's
conversations
great.
early before we hit
We
January.
appreciate that opportunity. Yeah.
Senator,
Thank you. I want to come back to the workforce issues. So I think I knew this, but I'd forgotten it. You made the point that people basically go from bus to rail. It's sort of a career progression.
Yeah,
That's what I think
it's a lot of the positions, sir. All CBAs are different in our industry, but not every single position, but overwhelmingly, like if you want to say be a rail operator, you come from being a bus operator.
Gotcha.
Yeah, not 100%.
No,
The last CBA allowed up to 30% to come from external.
I see.
And that was part of the last CBA agreement in connection to the Silver Line opening.
I see.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you're recruiting people into bus overwhelmingly, and most of your rail people.
For the
then come-
operations staff, sir.
For the
Yeah,
op-
for the
I'm-
tra-
I'm-
especially I would say the transportation operations staff. Yes.
Gotcha. We'll get the rest of it offline. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
thank you, Senator. We still have one more budget to hear, and the secretary has been very patient with us in the back. Any closing thoughts for us?
No.
Okay, well then we look forward to seeing you in late spring, early summer
Great.
with that plan.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again. Very nice meeting you all.
We don't have anybody signed up to testify in person, but I'll direct the subcommittee's attention. We have 2 written pieces of testimony. They should be on your floor system. Okay, next we have DPSCS corrections. We have Jacob Cash back with us 2 days in a row, and we have Secretary Scruggs here as well. Jacob, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you just mentioned, today I'll be going over the budget for DPSCS corrections. This unit includes the Division of Corrections as well as the Maryland Correctional Enterprises, which is the prison industry arm of the department, providing training and work opportunities for inmates. The overall budget allowance in fiscal 2024 is $945 million, which is a 3.5% increase of about 32 million. Going into the population discussion, we brought this up at the overview, but in fiscal 2023 so far, we have seen an increase of about 2% of the sentenced offender population. In Exhibit 2, I wanted to compare the pre-existing trend before COVID to the current trends that we're seeing now. If COVID never happened, which we obviously can't go back in time, but we would have expected the population to get down to about 16,500 inmates in July of 2020 or July of 2025. Based on the current growth of the inmate population, we would expect that to meet the previous trend. So in about 2.5 years, we'd expect the effects of COVID to dissipate and the population to resume where it was. In Exhibit 3, this shows the average age of offenders in DPSCS custody of sentenced offenders. And the portion that are young offenders, those below the age of 30, is making up a smaller portion than they used to. It's only making up 27% now, with about 4,000 inmates. Whereas in fiscal 2013, there were almost 8,000 inmates under the age of 30. And that was 37% of the inmate population. When looking at the average length of stay of sentenced offenders, there was also an increase during COVID as a result of fewer short sentence inmates being brought in and lower court processing speeds. This has improved in 2022 as more of those short sentence offenders are added to the department, and it's dropped back down to about 8 years on average. In Exhibit 5, you can see that the department mostly handles offenders with a sentence of over 15 years or a life sentence, although they do have several populations which are more transient in Baltimore City for the short sentence offenders, which is a responsibility of the state because of taking over Baltimore City Jail. In Exhibit 4, this shows the offender-on-offender assaults. Now, I know previously Senator Rosa Pepp had requested a comparison to other state assault rates, and we're still working on that. So we're providing the subcommittee with some of those results in the future. However, in fiscal 2022, their offender-on-offender assault rate did increase over the goal, and it's about level with where it was prior to the pandemic. Exhibit 7 shows the overall agency allowance in fiscal 2024, and most of the funding goes towards personnel as well as inmate medical. And if the inmate medical was not a contract, those would also be in large part personnel. I would also point your attention to the other box, which shows some of the expenses that are going to inmate payroll, for example, of $8.5 million. As well as the local pre-release program at $1.5 million. There have been, like I mentioned, $32 million in budget increases this year. Almost 10 million of that is just from employee and retiree health insurance, which is not very much. It's not controlled by the department. This really just depends on the market. There's also $5 million that was added, which is the net annualization of the 4.5 million or 4.5% cost of living adjustment. There are also reductions in turnover, which brings the department slightly closer to their budgeted turnover. It still is above the turnover rate that has been budgeted. Regular earnings also decreased because of rebasing of salaries, and that there's $1.7 million reduced because 14 positions are transferred out of this unit. Now, there are most of the changes in operational costs. I'd point out $3.5 million is being added to outfit regional mail rooms with enhanced contraband mitigation systems. There is also $1.5 million being added reflecting increased costs of MCE supplies that they use to produce goods. Let me skip forward a little bit to the vacancy discussion. So vacancies have been a large concern for this department, and Exhibit 9 shows the vacancies in the correctional units. Now, you can clearly see that correctional officers outnumber all the other types of staff by a large margin, but they do have the lowest vacancy rate. Now, if we hadn't, many of these correctional officer vacancies were not abolished, we would expect that rate to be similar to some of the other classifications of employees. But I would also point out that there are 24% vacancies in MCE, and that is affecting the amount of inmates that they can oversee at any given time. The first issue discussion is diving a little bit more deeply into vacancies and the staffing analysis that I brought up at the overview hearing. The staffing issues date back to about 2015, and that's because the number of new hires the department was bringing in dropped dramatically compared to where they were in the previous years. They have picked up speed since then, and in 2020 and 2021, there were more new hires than separations. That resulted in a slight decrease in the hiring gap that we've identified since the hiring crisis began. But in calendar 2022, the number of separations outpaced hires once again. And so there was a net loss of CEOs and an increase in that hiring gap. So this hiring gap, like I mentioned, is from the beginning. It's just the difference of hires and separations since 2014. But that doesn't mean that that's necessarily how many more positions need to be hired. And the preliminary results of the new staffing analysis indicate they would need many more positions than just that. To remind you, almost 1,800 CEO positions were eliminated since the beginning of the hiring crisis. And that hiring gap is just over 1,000. But in total, the department is going to need to add approximately 2.5 or 2,500 funded positions, which when you include the number of vacancies in these classifications, that would be about 3,000 added new hires. If all the 2,500 if all the 2,500 new PINs were granted and they were provided in the budget, that would correlate to about $185 million. And that's if all of them were hired for the entire year. If we stick to the more standard rate of assuming quarter vacancy rates, that would be about $140 million. There are some data concerns with this staffing analysis. And the first is that they've changed the way that leave data is being utilized to calculate the relief factor. And so this really only matters because there has been a lot more use of leave during COVID than there was prior. And at this point, at DLS's analysis of the staffing study, it seems that a good number of those increases could be because of leave usage. It's also not clear if leave usage will stay as high as it was during COVID in the coming years. And so that's something that we're concerned about, that it's possibly overshooting the number. Secondly, it doesn't also seem to correlate the exact number of funded positions that we have in the budget books. Even when we compare the expected turnover rate to the number that provided, we had some issues in ensuring that the study was actually using the correct numbers of these positions that are allowed. And there's also been changes in the 3 previous staffing studies that have been submitted. They use 3 different methodologies. Exhibit 13 compares these, but it's important to note that there are differences in the way that these numbers have been calculated. In the first section of Exhibit 13, it shows where each of the studies calculated the number of general post positions needed. The 2017 study did not include special posts, but in 2019 and 2021, those were included and are added in that second section. You can see overall, it's fairly similar, the number of CEOs that the previous 2 staffing studies recommend, but the average daily population has declined by 15% in that time. So it's not exactly what we would have expected. And there is a slight correlation between those facilities that had a decrease in their ADP and a decrease in the number of posts required, but it's not as close of a relationship as we might have expected. And we think that this could use some further analysis. In light of these staffing analysis results, we are concerned, as we have been, that all classifications are suffering too high vacancy rates in the department. And we are recommending first that DPSCS comments on that staffing analysis and the comparison to previous studies. And we're also asking them, or we're asking we're recommending to the budget committees, to restrict $200,000 pending a report on the development of numerical hiring goals. Because these are number-driven issues, we'd like to see a little bit more of a numerical goal rather than just reducing vacancies in general, since it has been such a long-standing issue. And finally, we are recommending to continue to restrict $100,000 in general funds pending the second of 4 quarterly hiring and attrition reports. This has been the case in the past 2 fiscal years, and it's been helpful to track the department's progress. The second issue I'd like to talk about today is correctional education. And I think this is something that we don't really talk about a lot in the budget. It is a shared responsibility between the Maryland Department of Labor, MDL, and DPSES. MDL operates the program and hires the staff, as well as procures all of the equipment and supplies that they need to run their correctional education programs. But some of that funding does come from DPSES. There's about $3.1 million in 2024 for equipment and supplies. Some of those equipment include tablets that I'll be talking about in a minute. And then there are also funding that goes towards correctional education instructors within MDL. And $2.4 million in fiscal 2024 is new money, which is the purpose of that money is to convert staff who have been hired directly through community colleges, to convert those to contractual FTE positions in MDL. And the funding would come from DPSES because of the way that this operation works. Now, these conversions are necessary because they have had some troubles in the past to keep the instructors on the job, to fill those positions and make sure that there's consistently an instructor for each course that they need to teach. And Exhibit 14 shows the correctional education enrollment figures over the past 6 years. In 2017, there were 6,000 correctional education students, and in 2021, that dropped to below 2,000. As a share of the correctional education, as a share of the correctional average daily population, it is also at about half the rate that it used to be. Occupational students were slightly less affected by that, but those rates remain low in 2022, whereas correctional education started to improve in 2022. This also presented an achievement gap in these years. Only 4 students were awarded diplomas in 2021. That's compared to 171 in 2022, which is a good improvement to continue serving students. But it's concerning that the level of certificates and diplomas awarded to students dropped that low during COVID-19, and that they are still as low as they are in 2022. Now, you just briefly mentioned that there are tablets that MDL uses for the correctional education program. And just to provide a little bit of a background, there are currently about 87 tablets in their schools, and this has been a progressively expanded program since about 2018. These are just tablets that would be in the school classrooms, and so they are dedicated to that purpose and they don't leave the classrooms. But there is another new tablet initiative that the department is undertaking, and they are procuring additional tablets through their existing telecommunications contract, which would provide a number of free services to inmates. It would allow each of them to use a tablet if they so choose. However, it's not forced upon anybody. And there are opportunities for those inmates to use an online commissary app, as well as purchase streaming of premium content. Now, this is being provided to the department free of charge through this contract. And that in and of itself caused some concern for DLS, which centers around the fact that if their service is being provided free of charge that are dependent upon the personal spending habits of offenders, that could affect in the future the level of access to those tablets and those resources. And it's something that we would want to avoid. And so we're asking the department to comment on that fact. The final issue today is MCE spending. Maryland Correctional Enterprises is a self-supporting agency that they hire staff to oversee inmates undergoing training and work programs. They pay inmates a range of $1.30 to $9 a day based on their industry and skill level. And there are also 12 individuals who are employed in a competitive market or a program which provides competitive market wage for their work. MCE spending in fiscal 2022 was higher than the number of sales. And that's the main issue that we're hitting on today, and that has been a concern in the past. They do have a fund balance that is able to cover these net changes. But if the trend continues where sales are lower than spending, it's possible that MCE could be in more trouble. They also, as I mentioned earlier in the analysis, have a 24% vacancy rate for their officers. And it's likely that they will not be able to reduce that vacancy rate until they increase sales so that there is a larger revenue base. I'll also point out the red line in this exhibit shows the level of inmate employment, and that is still low because of COVID-19. All of the business units have reopened since some of those were closed and some of those were changed into other types of goods or services. But the overall level of employment is below the goal, and it's below what we would want for the opportunities for inmates. And finally, Exhibit 18 shows a little bit of the customer service side of MCE. They are, providing goods and services to primarily state institutions, and the average delivery time that it takes for them to complete those orders has increased during the pandemic. In 2022, it dropped slightly from that peak in 2021, but it still is taking longer on average for people to get what they're buying, and that might discourage customers in the future from continuing to buy from MCE. It's also possible that since MCE sales have been so low, that they may want to look at the costs that they're charging their customers and might need to adjust those costs, especially since the inmate pay scale was just adjusted last year. In conclusion, there are two recommended actions for this budget. The first, as I mentioned, was $200,000 restricted in order to receive numerical hiring goals. And the second is to restrict $100,000 for quarterly hiring and attrition reports. Appendix 1 at the end summarizes the hiring and attrition reports, but obviously there's much more detailed analysis in the document. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, but that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions for our analyst? Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jacob, the correlation between 2018, 17 or so, but really, let's go back to 2019, 2020, that the tremendous drop off on inmate employment, even though, this is a sedentary population of folks, even though we had COVID, was that due to the reduction or in correctional officers? What do we know?
So we couldn't say for sure, but you can see in 2018 and 19, they were already dipping in that level of inmate employment. And during that time, it was reported that that they were trying to increase that again, that it was lowering because of those high vacancy rates. In 2020, that drop was mostly because of COVID and because they were not safely able to operate most of those business units. But since then, they have reopened them, and it's likely that the vacancy rate is continuing to to depress the number of individuals hired.
Okay, secondly, the MDL education challenge, been around a little bit. That challenge has been around for quite a while. Is there any projection? Obviously, I'll ask the secretary, but is there anything that DLS picked up on regarding any hopes of us coming to some sort of resolution on that end?
Well, it's unclear exactly how the department intends to encourage participation in these programs. As a part of case management, they go through all of the necessary or recommended educational opportunities. But you know, it's really up to the department and MDL to make sure that they have the accessibility for classrooms. So converting these pins should make sure that they have more instructors at any given time. But, you know, I'm not exactly sure how the department intends to increase that enrollment. And I think that's something that they could be pressed on. But I know that it's not controlled by them. They don't dictate the level of enrollment and of achievement, but they certainly do have a role in encouraging it.
Yeah, and I'll leave it at this. So again, I kind of go back with, well, at least a look at this, you know, probably over 10 years ago, transition from Department of Education over to MDL, and just seems to be a problem that we can't seem to get around. So, all right, thank you.
Senator Rosebud.
Yeah, I'm just unclear on the definition. So your chart on 22 has CE students served and occupational students served.
So the correctional education is more like high school and college courses, whereas occupational classes are going to be training and certificate programs.
Got it. Okay, now I understand. Non-degree. Mm-hmm. Do we have any idea why? I mean, they've all gone down, or mostly gone down. But do we have any idea why the occupational is so much lower than the degree stuff?
As a whole, like in terms of why there's that sort of share, I'm not sure. There certainly a large part of that population that they serve has a gap in educational achievement pre-existing. And so one of the main charges of the department in rehabilitating them is bringing them up to speed and where they should be on their education. And so occupational students would more so be, they're adding skills and adding value to but that they wouldn't have had previously or wouldn't be expected.
Well, is the overwhelming number of what's called CE, is that high school?
Yes.
Do we have data on that?
I'm not sure in the MFR, but we can certainly get that to you.
I mean, I mentioned this as a secretary when I was meeting with her earlier. I'd love to see whatever data there is of when folks come into the correctional system, what their deficits are and what their strengths are, and how you quantify that and say, okay, X number of people, their reading and math aren't where they need to be employable. Mm-hmm. And then how many work on that, and then how many, I mean, everybody to have a decent income, whether you're coming out of prison or you're coming from home, you got to have skills in addition. You have to have occupationally related skills,
right,
in addition to just basic math and English. So I'd love to understand big picture where folks are coming into the system, what they're getting in the system, and how they're coming out of the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Jacob, just based on our conversations yesterday, do we know, and you spoke a little bit about new hires and their relation and pay scale to veterans in the department, when the last time we've done a salary scale review for corrections?
For corrections, the department can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was recently in fiscal 2020, the new correctional, fiscal 2021 was the first year it was rolled out for the new correctional officer pay scale. And it's completely separate from the standard pay scale for state employees, whereas it used to be the same pay scale, but it was separated out so that the steps and the grades could be on their own. I'm not sure the level of which they analyzed that data to come to the conclusion that it needed to turn out that way, but the pay scale is, as pretty much up to date as we could hope for right now.
Okay, thank you. Madam Secretary, thank you for your patience. Please bring up anyone from your team you'd like. And ready whenever you are.
Thank you. Good afternoon again, Chair Alfred and members of the Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I'm the Acting Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today are Annie Harvey, Acting Deputy Secretary of Operations, Christina Lentz, Acting Deputy Secretary of Administration, Phil Morgan, Deputy Commissioner of Corrections, Stephen Saunders, Chief Executive Officer of Maryland Correctional Enterprises, and Nigel Roberts, our Chief Financial Officer. The department appreciates its ongoing collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services, as well as Mr. Cash. This was yet another thoughtful and very thorough analysis. We thank Mr. Cash for his hard work. I would like to begin by recognizing staff in the Division of Correction. These are individuals who do incredible work every day. The analysis contains 3 issues for the department to respond to and 2 recommended actions. I will start off by saying that we concur with the recommended actions. I will also like to note that the department is requesting a change in the due date for the quarterly hiring reports for FY 2024 from the 12th to the 25th. DLS has requested the department comment on the most recently released staffing analysis and the estimated number of additional positions required in comparison to previous staffing studies. The staffing analysis that was completed used a new methodology known as net annual work hours. This process is more accurate for measuring staffing needs than previously used methods. Basically, net annual work hours allows for analysis based on actual hours an employee is available to work instead of accounting for work shifts, which are 8 to 10 hours blocks. Additional factors considered by the net annual work hours were included in our written testimony. The results of the analysis determined the department would need an additional 2,500 positions to reach full staffing. These 2,500 positions are in addition to the current vacancies, resulting in a need of over 3,000 positions. Madam Chair, during our budget hearing, you asked me what my goal would be in decreasing vacancies in the department. While I did provide an answer, I also looked into this issue on a deeper level and reviewed hiring trends over the past 8 years. In 2016, as the result of a complete restructuring of the hiring process, the department hired the lowest number of correctional officers during the past 8 years, 63. The department also experienced 387 terminations of correctional officers in the same year. In effect, the department ended 2016 with an additional 324 frontline correctional officer vacancies. The department did experience significant improvements in hiring between 2017 and 2022. However, we also continue to experience terminations consistent with prior levels. As such, we need to do more than fill vacancies. We also need to reduce the level of terminations within our department. Significant steps have been taken to address hiring and retention, including hiring bonuses for all new hires and additional bonuses in difficult to hire regions. A retention longevity pay incentive program was implemented to retain experienced personnel beyond their initial retirement date. The department has increased its presence in the community at job fairs, community events, colleges, and universities. The Maryland State Ad Agency was also engaged to assist with improving the department's hiring efforts. The department has streamlined the hiring process to include same-day conditional offer of employment. However, we are hindered by our competition with county jails, other states, and the federal government. A bordering state is currently offering a $10,000 hiring bonus, putting them on par with our first-year salary. The department faces the challenges of negative perceptions about the basic duties of the job, as well as the physical plant of our aging institutions. Television shows portray corrections in a negative light. Under my leadership as the Assistant Secretary of Programs, Treatment, and Reentry Services, it was evident that the citizens hold poor perceptions of our returning citizens. To be successful in recruiting and retaining, incentives are extremely helpful, but it might also be time for us to address the negative perceptions people hold about a correctional career. A position as a correctional officer includes generous state benefits, retirement, opportunities for advancement, and the potential to work in custody and non-custody roles. And if I may say so, I am the example. For younger generations that are drawn to new job opportunities, a career in corrections would be ideal. After working for a period of time in a custody position, the opportunity exists to transfer to specialty units or transition from operations into administrative positions. The department facilitated over 400 of these internal promotions last year to retain employees instead of interested in developing a new skill. Yet despite the professional opportunities the department offers, we will continue to struggle with hiring until our dedicated men and women are recognized for their commitment and the department is recognized for the professional organization that we are. Responding to the other issues DLS asked us to comment on, I will address overtime. The department takes a multifaceted approach in its efforts to address how we utilize overtime. We closely monitor overtime trends and as much as possible, implement operational modifications. In terms of monitoring trends and modifying operations, we track the number of staff that are not available for duty on a daily basis, on a shift-by-shift basis, to make sure our facilities are properly staffed while reducing overtime as efficiently as possible. The biggest strain on our staff is mandatory overtime versus voluntary overtime. That is when you are told you are not going home. It is important. It is a part of the mission of public safety, and it is important to public safety, but we are always there. But it is tough on the staff who have to do this every day. Therefore, we continue to prioritize the hiring of additional correctional officers. Next, the department was asked to comment on the new tablet program, including steps taken to ensure that access to tablets and electronic resources is dependent on or impacted by personal spending habits of incarcerated persons. The department is very proud of the tablet initiative. We have begun rollout to most facilities, and we will be able to offer the tablet to every incarcerated individual at no cost. Additionally, the tablets were preloaded with free content, including books, Career One, Khan Academy, GTL via ViPath, Help App, Webster's Dictionary, calculator, education and career apps, religious apps, self-help learning opportunities, to including the Calm app, which is a meditation app. Incarcerated individuals are also able to message family and friends at no cost. Also available is the Edge app that allows incarcerated population to purchase commissary and check their banking information at no charge. The tablet program does allow individuals to purchase premium media content, including music, movies, and phone calls, as discussed by Mr. Cash. Finally, MCE was asked to comment on current efforts to reduce MCE order delivery times, increase sales, and increase inmate employment. COVID-19 had a significant impact on MCE's operations, especially given the challenges presented by disruptions to the supply chain. Although delivery times increased during the height of COVID-19, MCE is returning to more normal delivery times and working with Human Resources Division, they have been able to fill vacancies for CDL drivers. MCE continues to utilize technology to track their business functions using the new Enterprise Resource Management System Global Shop solution. They are seeking to improve their capacity to track deliveries in real time. MCE is currently seeking ways to improve their product line, recognizing that improvements can benefit the incarcerated individual who participates in occupational and vocational training programs, as well as their customers. MCE has also worked with Human Resources to fill additional positions, including the hiring of research and development specialists who will research new product needs for state agencies, better aligning practices with current customer trends and needs. As noted in the analysis, MCE has had to deal with price increases of its raw materials due to rising inflation across all product lines and has had to adjust pricing on hundreds of products to compensate for their unforeseen price increases. MCE has positioned themselves for new projects to begin at the end of FY23 and continue into FY24. Undertaking these new projects allow them to offer increased vocational participation to the incarcerated population. As we return to a post-pandemic environment, MCE has resumed vocational training for over 1,100 incarcerated individuals and strives to expand opportunities to bring on additional trainees. MCE brings on new participants monthly and is striving to add an additional 50 to 100 program participants by the end of the fiscal year. Despite obstacles, MCE continues to persevere. They evolve, they review their business plans, and they provide some very essential workforce development skills to the incarcerated population. We thank them and their staff. Again, we concur with the recommended actions and are currently ready to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Senator Salling.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I've seen the commercials. I see the signs out there for the bonuses. I go right by there and I've seen them more than once. I know we have a problem just knowing the number that we do have for COs and what we do need. And I'm concerned about those that are working all the overtime constantly. It's a burden to you, but it's a burden to them. Working safely is important to me. And them to be safe to work the hours that they are and going home safely is a very big concern, I know, to you. Now, I know we've had incentives to try to help that out. And you stated that other states are doing more. Is there other ways? I mean, I know more funds is not the easiest way at times, but we're doing 5,000 at the moment for incentives. Is there other ways that you possibly know, or maybe we could help this endeavor to get more of CEOs on the job?
Well, I think we have to look at retention first, and we have to ensure that those that are working for us understand how important they are, that again, that they are recognized as the true correctional professionals that they are, because then we'll get people to stay a little longer.
Right.
And then they in turn will introduce other people to us because they'll be motivated to work, morale will be up, and we can start to bring in other individuals. They'll tell their families, they'll tell their friends. So we've got to look at avenues, pathways to success for those that are already there. And then that's going to help us encourage other opportunity from the outside.
So we just got to do better than the other states.
We
got
do.
to do better than the
We do. And we're going to work on that, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Rosebud and then Senator Jackson.
I should know the answer to this, but does Maryland Correctional Enterprises only have state agency customers, or does it have other customers?
Mr. Saunders.
Well, our customer base is state agencies, universities, colleges, and nonprofits. That is all.
And about how many customers?
It's quite a list. I can send it to you.
I'd appreciate
Hundreds.
hundreds. Is there some reason why, is it the law, why it's only state, university and nonprofits?
It is the law.
Any idea why it's the law? You've been around this longer than I have.
I don't think so. State agency.
That was a compliment.
I think I've been around a long time.
I meant in this field.
In this field, 14 years, previous 30 years working for General Motors in manufacturing.
Oh, great. Great. So, but what I'm going with it, but you don't have a sense of why it's limited that way. I mean, it sounds like they got a customer problem, and more customers would be good. So I'm just curious, but
The thought process from my perspective is this.
okay.
We don't want to steal work from the outside businesses that are
I see.
providing similar.
That's the
products.
rationale. I understand. That's very helpful. A different question. In answer to my question last time, you sent me the answers on the average age of correctional officers at point of hire, which you said it's 38 years old. That's stunningly high to me. Can you comment on that? I mean, it's obviously related to the problem, but.
So I think one of the things that we just see nationally is that the millennium employee likes to be able to move around. They like to telework. They are not as dedicated to coming into an environment where they are kind of restricted. And you're going to find the older person that is seeking an opportunity because they have completed their educational opportunities at later ages, or just because they need that additional employment and it's a great opportunity for pathways to access is who we're attracting at this point.
That's fascinating. Thank you for that information. You then broke down where they came from, and 35% came from healthcare. What were they doing in healthcare? I'm curious.
We have many correctional officers that have nursing degrees. We have that have worked within healthcare as phlebotomists and other clinical type technical jobs. And we have been able to actually utilize their talents in our medical areas and our hospital areas. So
Gotcha.
yes.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, always great to see you. A couple of quick questions. Again, I mentioned earlier, this challenge, the educational training challenge that we've looked at, and I say we, and going forward, we want to be a we as well. It's a huge challenge. Again, not only if the numbers are decreasing on the occupational side, but on the educational side, I mean, returning citizens, we want them to return and be citizens. We don't want them to return to you. So that's always a challenge. So if there's any information that you'd like to share with us going forward, not necessarily today, or any challenges that you may have with that we may be able to help, we certainly want to be a part of it. Again, I remember the transition from the Department of Education to MDL, to trying to figure out, was that the right choice, going back and forth. And there's somewhere we're missing something somewhere. And again, that's a collective we. I am interested in your, because everybody has this recruiting and retention, challenge. And it's always, regardless of how many work groups we put together, it equals to retention. It doesn't equal to, I can get you through the door. But the key is how do I keep you there? So there are different concepts in the law enforcement world. There's the drop programs, right? So we get you to stay this long and it doesn't hurt the system, and you're keeping experienced folks. And once we get out of our own way, there's an understanding there that actually works. That concept works. I love the fact that you all have employed that retention, the longevity piece beyond the normal retirement date for folks and benefiting. So I'll fall on the sword, Madam Chair and Madam Secretary and others. I am one of the folks over the last 9 years, because of my background, who have come into the General Assembly, and every year, because I know who does the work. Every year I'm looking for a benefit incentive for employees. And then oftentimes that was getting those who do such work to a 20-year retirement. And so there are some consequences that come with that, where folks have the option to walk out the door. So we want to work with you as part of my penance to work with you and keeping those folks around. So I just want to say that on the record, because I do understand it. And but I am happy to see in your part of your strategy is that you're looking for ways to incentivize beyond the normal retirement date. So looking forward to working with you. So thank you.
Sir.
Senator Solomon.
Yeah, if I could ditto that, I have to, because out for many years working in a union and in a workforce, they found ways to keep their people. And the way they did that, they just didn't start off with an incentive. While they worked there, or even those that have worked there, or even those that have been there faithfully and get ready to retire, got an incentive, got that benefit. We helped them out and they stayed there and they continue to grow in that. And that's the opportunity that I believe we can continue to grow the workforce and help the state of Maryland, because a lot of our departments are hurting and they need people badly. And we hear it every time. And the good senator has great ideas for training and for continue to getting our young people to be a part of the state and learn parts of our state of what we have and what we're all about. I think it's really important if we find different ways where we give those people those incentives to make sure that they stay, because they're trained, they're qualified, they're doing their job, they're proving themselves.
Absolutely.
And it's a good thing that we can just keep them, and that Delaware doesn't get them. Pennsylvania doesn't get them.
You're right.
So let's see what more we can do for them. I think it's a benefit. And we're here, as the good senator said also, to help this out. We need to work together to make a difference. And the only way we're going to do that is we have great ideas and we can make a difference by working through this. And I know we can. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you both for that. Having lived that experience, I understand that need and know that we need to do that, and it will be a great morale booster.
And maybe that's something maybe it's just add on.
I have a couple, Senator. I'm going to come back to you. Madam Secretary, the forced overtime issue is a real concern, appreciating that you don't have the luxury of not having anybody in the building, that you have to keep it staffed. But with the vacancy rates and the staffing issues, we're seeing a lot of forced overtime, which is really impacting quality of life for a lot of state employees. Do we have data on that? How much the average employee is being forced to work overtime, average overtime? How frequently compared over years? Is that something the department can provide the subcommittee?
We can get you that information.
Okay.
We maintain what's called a daily post assignment worksheet. And on that daily post assignment worksheet, we are aware of what our entitlements are. So we know why an individual is off today because they're in training, they have a personal leave, they have an annual leave, they're out sick. And those are many of the drivers for the overtime. But our staffing analysis and overtime policy also lets us take volunteers first. So individuals, I would say, have been hesitant to sign up for the volunteer list because they know they're going to get drafted and have to work overtime. So they have to balance that because they have to still be well and be able to, maintain while they're there with us.
We talked about last 2 weeks ago when you were first here and less than a week on the job, I think, about your goals for vacancy rate. I'd also love to hear your goals for that forced overtime as well, how we can limit that moving forward.
We're going to continue to look at that.
Okay.
And I truly believe that as we continue to make efforts to increase morale, not just retain and hire more, but increase morale and people feel comfortable and more appreciated for what they do, I think more individuals will begin to volunteer. As we recognize them and we can begin to move them into opportunities for collateral posts, we have a lot of shining stars. I know many of them that we can reach down and touch and pull up and say, here's an opportunity for you, here's an opportunity for you. We got to be able to keep them in that 20-year retirement because that's very important to many of them. They don't want to take that challenge and go to the 30, but we're going to really start to aggressively look at our staff and make them feel appreciated. And I think that's going to help. Changing that mindset and changing that narrative that I want to change will help us have a better DPSCS.
Okay. And thank you. Are you also be looking at, I'm not sure the term salary compression works here, but the issue of while we've had a couple good years of the budget, and a couple of years of COLAs and things, but that's kind of compressed the folks who've been there for a couple of years. Are you looking at that and how we can compensate for that?
Correct. One of the things that we did, as you all know, we looked at our base salary for hiring. So now one of the things that I'm asking my HR to work with DBM is to look at the salary equity across the board for individuals that are already there. That's very important to us. So we will be working with them to do that.
I think the subcommittee would agree. We'd be very interested in seeing those numbers and how we can be helpful. I think that's going to answer a lot of the challenges that we face.
Sure.
Okay, I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to go to Senator Rosepep.
Thank you. And I just forgot it, so I'm going to give it back to you, but I'll remember it. I apologize.
Okay, so Jacob's always taking great notes. We've talked about forced overtime. We've talked about salary equity. Two more questions is how will the staffing study, realizing you just received it, you're still going through it, will we see the result of that staffing study in next year's budget request?
I think I still need some more time to analyze it. I have read it. I've read it several times, but I also want to bring it to my facility wardens and have them look at it so that we can look and make some decisions on how we can balance that, that need. What I do like about it is that it does actually look at the amount of time an individual has worked and the amount of time that they're off to make determinations for what we need. But we have so many other, what I'll say, tentacles that also affect that. We have special assignment posts that affect that. We have collateral posts that affect that. So I need to see how all of those play into the staffing analysis to make that determination.
A lot of tentacles here and they all feed into one another. So could we perhaps check in with you and your department late spring, early summer on progress there, appreciating that you're still working through the new staffing study and all those things.
Absolutely.
Okay, last question is the educational and certification programs. I think the subcommittee cares deeply about as well. Do you have any goals there in increasing participation and outcomes?
So the education is twofold. So the Department of Labor actually controls our GED and our high school diploma education. And if you're familiar, the classroom hours a few years ago were increased to 240 hours. So that expanded the length of time that teacher was needed. Whereas before the teacher was available in a shorter period of time. We're also looking at individuals that are coming in that we have a wait list because we have some individuals that are mandated and required by age to go to school and others that just have not completed those opportunities that are on the wait list to get on. During COVID, Department of Labor did have a number of teachers that contracted COVID and were not able to come into the facilities. And so they did go to a manual learning where they had the principal actually bring in the work and then it was checked on the outside. So while our numbers seem to be very low, we were still managing that. The other challenge is with labor hiring special education teachers, just because our population that's coming in, many of them need have those special needs. So I know labor had been having those challenges, but we're going to continue to work closely with our labor partners for that, for the GED in high school. We are already working with labor on our occupational skills and training opportunities. They continue to bring on other skills. We have our barbering, we have auto mechanics. They're looking at the CDL opportunity in Hagerstown in partner with Hagerstown Community College. We just completed through a labor grant our peer recovery specialist where we graduated 40 incarcerated persons as peer recovery specialists, and we'll be utilizing them to help with recovery efforts for our inmate incarcerated persons. 26 of them are actually sitting for their certification within the next month. So they will actually have that as a mechanism to transition back into the community and get job opportunities when they go out. We try to work with labor to match the workforce need with what we train behind the walls. That's important to us because we don't want to train you in construction if we're not building anything when you go outside. We want to make sure there's an opportunity and a pathway to success for you. So we will continue to work with them on that.
Those all sound like creative approaches to the opportunity here. And I think whatever we can do to support that, appreciating we don't have Department of Labor's budget, but I'm not sure when they're up. I will pass some questions along to that subcommittee chair, but it's important to this, I would say, the whole committee. Next week? Perfect. I will pass some questions along. All right, Senator Rosepep.
Thank you. Well, you answered the question that I had forgotten, so thank you for that. Which was, do you have CDL programs? Because relating, you were sitting here for the testimony from the metro system. The demand for CDL drivers is just enormous. It's bus drivers, it's school bus drivers, it's truck drivers, and then there's Uber and Lyft. So, and the beauty of it is that it requires skill and ability, but not enormous amount of training, because for all the reasons that are kind of sort of understandable. So that's something I really would encourage you to try to expand, because anyone who's ready to go to drive can get a decent job, like out of the box. That leads to my second question, which is, how does it work for employers to recruit folks who are being released from prison?
So we have reentry specialists in each one of our regions, East, West, Central, Jessup region. Those reentry specialists work with the community so that we can connect our incarcerated individuals to employment. And this is prior to them going out the door. They can get in contact with our reentry specialists. We also work again with labor, with the workforce development centers, the American Job Centers in each of the communities. And that's another pathway that the employers can get involved. But if they reach out to the department, to our reentry unit, we have a number of employers that already work with us, and we are always willing to take on more, and we can connect them to individuals that have skill sets that can support their operations.
And they can be identified before they leave.
Yes, sir.
I'd love some information of how that really works and at what scale it's at, because it would seem to me that employers who are interested in skills that you're training people for, and I'm going to focus on drivers because that's the one we're talking about, could work very much like, and maybe it does, like the military recruiting model in high schools. Is military recruiters have quotas they have to hit in terms of how many people they got to recruit for this service, that skill set. And they get access to the kids who are in high school. They take the military recruiting exam. They know what's going on, and they market to them very aggressively. I find it hard to believe that model couldn't be a great opportunity in the areas where you're training people, where people are ready to go. So I'd be interested in a little more detail.
I think that's a great model. I think we also need to recognize, though, that we have to change the stigma that some businesses and the community has on the returning citizen, and let them be willing to offer that returning citizen an opportunity to be employed. And all of the businesses haven't done that. I'll give you a good example. We had, when FedEx opened up in the Hagerstown region, they reached out to my reentry specialist there, and we were able to give them about 6 individuals that started working at FedEx there. So we need them to come to us and say, we're out there at all of the conferences, we're there, promoting the opportunity, but let us know that you have the opportunity, because I'm sure we have someone that we can pair you up with.
Well, let me take it one step further and then I'll quit. Is what about state and local government agencies? I mean, they seem to be obvious candidates.
So the challenge that I see with state and local agencies is the background check in some of those agencies. And we've got to learn to get past that. We do. We have to learn that an individual that has not been in trouble for 20 years, or giving them opportunity. But many state and local agencies, unfortunately, still use a background check, and that can be a deterrence. I will put a shining star on MCE, because MCE does hire, and currently is hiring, has employed with them several of our returning citizens that are no longer incarcerated. So they're a state agency that's working to show that these individuals can make a difference.
Well, let me make a suggestion, Madam Chair, to think about for our budget language, is getting the state government to do a comprehensive review of what those are and how we can have a state hiring strategy out of corrections.
That would be
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much. I think we'll be back a couple more times before
Yes,
the
ma'am.
budget's put to bed. We
Yes.
appreciate you and your department.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, we do have a number of witnesses signed up to testify, and reminder that we have a 3-minute limit, especially because I am now 23 minutes late to a meeting, which is fine, but so is Senator Jackson. Senator Rosebud. So we have a number of individuals signed up, unfavorable, Dewan Burton, Ashley Devon Johnson. Let's start with both of you and then we'll keep going.
Madam Chair, there are 2 individuals from my organization, probably should have been signing me up.
Okay.
Nicole Hanson.
So you're in lieu of these two?
Yes,
These two.
yes.
We'll accept. Okay.
It's probably about 3 of us. You can get us all out the way at the same time.
Okay, so I have Matan Zemer, Tiana, and Tiana Maines.
That.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you all. You may start.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm sorry that you're 23 minutes late when the advocates come up, but I apologize for that. I'm Nicole Hanson Mundell. I am the Executive Director of Out for Justice, a grassroots-based nonprofit, 10 years in existence organization that is actually led by formerly incarcerated individuals who've made a decision to rebuild our lives, pay close attention to the legislative process, and engage in a number of re-entry programming over the last 10 years. While we are here to really alert you about a capital budget issue, I know that this is really dealing with the operational budget, but we're here to really put this committee on alert around the capital budget as it relates to women coming out of our prisons and jails. And rarely do we ask the departments about the gender-specific focus areas when we're talking about hiring, right? When we're talking about all these questions you all ask. And so one of the things I want you to always remember when you're questioning these agencies, especially the department, is what is the gender responsive focus? Matan will really speak to the logistical aspects, but I wanted to answer Mr. Rosenpeck's question because I think you make some valid points to the department around hiring models and things like that. And what the secretary acknowledged is that the criminal record itself prohibits state agencies based on their guidelines in terms of how they choose to hire individuals, and also private entities. And so some of the ways that we can remediate those problems and get formerly incarcerated people into high wage jobs. We don't want just low level jobs, Senator. We are fully capable of leading a tech industry or leading an agency, but the criminal record itself is the problem. And so when you go out to your colleagues, and we're talking about things like expungement, that those are the things that will help the secretary with recruiting. You know, it's just not changing the morale; it's actually changing the law. And then I will also talk about the employer partnerships that you all really mentioned. Just remembering that not all women want to drive trucks. Maybe they do, but maybe they don't, right? And so let's urge the department to really think about careers where women, young women too, want to thrive in, and making sure that we have a Department of Corrections that's really interested in women, specifically the women's pre-release facility, and making sure that we can build a separate brick and mortar place for women within 18 months of their release. That will be a priority for Out for Justice. I will never stop coming to a Justice Committee until that the dirt is in the ground and that building is, because we can do it, right? We're a smart state. We got money to do it. We can build this, we can get this done. And we're here to ensure that that happens.
Yes, hi Chair, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for taking the time. I know it's been a long day and you've seen us before just a few days ago. My name is Matan Zemmer. I'm with Jews United for Justice. I'm a Maryland statewide community organizer and a member of the Women's Pre-Release Equity Coalition. It's an honor to be here alongside our partners. I'll just jump in because there are just a few things I just want to highlight based on what's been discussed today and Mr. Cash's report. Thank you for that. A couple of things that jumped out to us were the population numbers, right? Acknowledging that there's been a decrease over the last few years, but we're seeing an uptick recently. So as we think about the Women's Pre-Release Center and how many beds we need, we have a lot of questions around the projected number of 64 beds. We think that that's lower than what is actually needed, and we're curious to get more details on where they're pulling those numbers from. So that's a remaining question for us. Also want to acknowledge on page 26 of the report, the acknowledgement that there's only 5 women working outside of MCIW currently. And I think that we're all in agreement that that's a horrible circumstance for that. You know, these women need access to jobs, and it's currently not being done. The programs have been cut significantly. And we understand that a lot of that is because of COVID, but curious how long that it's going to take to get those back up and running. Also just want to appreciate that all the work that you all been doing, the partnership. We've gotten a lot of updates over the last few days. There's a lot of communication. It's a great change from past years. So we're really, especially from the departments. So we're grateful for that moving forward. So the questions really that remain for us are, you know, around the beds. We're also curious that the capital improvement plan has not been updated. We told that was going to get updated to reflect women's pre-release. That has not been done yet. So we're curious about that timeline. You know, around partnership. Partners within the coalition want to be a resource, and we've been previously told that we'd be invited to meetings to work with the department. We still would like to do that. We have not received that yet, but obviously we have the experts at the table who have the lived experience and can provide real invaluable guidance and want to see that through. The other thing is just the budget. Again, we know that this is capital, so it's not totally relevant here, but we talked previously about the 2 million pre-authorization. We're now hearing word from DGS that they actually need $5 million to move on to the next phase. And so we would love to see the 2 million put back in. That's essential. But if that's 3 million less than what the department needs to move forward with the next stage, then we're going to end up back here next year with another year of delay and waiting for implementation. So if DGS is saying it needs 5 million, at the very minimum, we hope that we can see that in this year's budget so that they can move forward without any further delays. I think I've taken up a lot more time. Oh yeah, so the other thing is that there was a Falcon report, the consultants that were hired to issue a report. We're still waiting to see the results from that report. So I'm hoping for you all as well, so we can see how they plan to move forward. So we'll keep coming back and asking for those reports and those updates. But really just a lot of gratitude. We'll be at the capital budget subcommittee hearings as well, but just appreciate your continued partnership so we can make sure this gets done this year and we don't end up back here next year fighting for scraps to make this happen. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll say what I said the last couple of days, and I know my ASME partners and others, but please make sure we have these written comments. That's vital for us as we're making budgetary decisions. Secondly, the women's facility, we're on that. We're definitely not going to give up on that. Thirdly, from an employment standpoint, you know, we're getting there since Justice Reinvestment. We've changed some things, expungement, advances in expungement. We're not far enough yet, but there's also, you know, the checking the box and some other things that are occurring, state government, local government, and to help us get around this. In my full-time job, I'm in Prince George's County, and we are actually systematically going through to look at and assess our hiring practices. So we're getting there, and couple that with incentives, which this committee is working with the business community. So we're gonna all walk this down together. So we appreciate you all.
And like Matan said, Senator Jackson, we run reputable nonprofit organizations, right? We're managing up to $1 million a year. And so when we're talking about collaborating with the state, when we know that this project will require some community surveying and the like, we want to be considerate, right? We have a real investment in this project and should be treated as business professionals just like anyone else.
Absolutely. Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. I apologize for my comment. I just meant this is a very inquisitive committee this year, so we've been having long hearings. Okay.
Yeah, no, we love it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Really appreciate it.
All right, the last person I have signed up for testimony, and I apologize, Miss Akpabio. Did I get that correct? Okay.
We have two. Ms. Owens. Sure, sit right here. Am I going first? Yes. Okay. Of course. I'm following. Good afternoon. Obviously, it's been a long day for everybody. My name is Linda Owens, Corporal Linda Owens. I am from Maryland Reception Diagnostic Classification Center. I started in corrections in 1999. I'm also a part of the staffing analysis team that has just completed staff analysis all across the state. I have been to every institution in the state of Maryland. I have visited every post and visited all 3 shifts in every jail from Jessup, Cumberland, Hagerstown, Baltimore City. I'm aware that you may have in front of you, I don't know if you have the 2019 staff analysis or the Moss report. That Moss report was supposed to be done in conjunction with the 15-member team that I was on. But that report was sent in ahead of us. Our report is done, completed with paralegal and Council 3 president, and will be submitted. It's over 100 pages. As I'm sitting here, I'm coming to the awareness that maybe I'm just here to put a face on all these numbers. There's so much more to corrections than these numbers. You cannot calculate it by hours. You cannot. I am a widow. I'm a mother of 5. You want to talk about the overtime? This is the reality. If I don't go in and work 3 to 11 voluntarily, my assigned shift is 11 to 7. So I'll go in, work 3 to 11, so I won't get drafted on day shift that morning. That's the reality. The average correctional officer works 12 to 16 hours a day. Everybody, from CO1 to CO3. Now the lieutenants have been given permission to do overtime. They never were allowed, but we need the bodies. It's crucial. Now, right now, the staff analysis team, we looked at the facility staffing plans, OSLs, operating staffing levels, the special assignment posts, the pens that are being robbed from the Division of Corrections to hide the vacancies. Those pens are being taken from Department of Corrections and given to other state agencies. That way, the vacancies won't look that bad. So the numbers are still a lie. I know they are because I'm there every day. I'm there 16 hours a day. My bosses know it. All due respect to my boss, Scruggs, I respect her, but we are not going to change the problem with the Division of Corrections by making the 30-year retirement. No, you're not. You're not going to solve the problem by bringing in 18-year-olds because you tried it in 2006. I was there. I was there in 2006. You changed the age from 21 to 18, and it was a disaster because you can't bring 18-year-olds and give them a weapons card. No. So that means the 18-year-olds they couldn't be weapons qualified. So now they're getting paid more than the person who taking on more risk, which created a morale issue because I'm working hard and I'm putting my life on the line. And now I have a person who can ride 3 years, 18, 19, 20, 24 years and not take the same risk I take. And then on top of that, you pretty much crippled transportation. Transportation is the most important part of the Division of Corrections. This is how people getting back and forth to court. So now all the transportation units, CTU, T-Corps out in Hagerstown, Cumberland, Roxbury, they are so short. They're supposed to escort inmates 1-on-1, 2-on-1. I see transportation people coming to my jail, taking out 10 people at a time. Max 1s, max 2s, high risk, putting their lives on the line daily, working 12 hours on a gun post. The policy says you don't work more than 8 hours on a gun post. Some of us work 20.
I've been stuck at a hospital, on a hospital trip for 20 hours, 21 hours, to the point I gave up my weapons card. I gave up my weapons card because, to me, if it's not mandatory, I'm not going to carry it. And when you brought the 18-year-olds in, you made it so the senior officers had a choice. And some of us did it to just save our lives. Some of us did it because the younger people who were coming in, because we were so short, we couldn't even train them properly. We had to put them on post immediately because we needed them. But now you have hundreds of people who really would never be trained as well as I was trained. That's why you need the senior officers to stay. You need that retention, beyond retention. You need to give the senior officers all the steps that they earned. I know. But right now, the quick fix, you spent $30 million on new recruits. My suggestion is that you spend $30 million or more giving the people who are there 10, 15, 20, 25. I met people with 50 years while I was traveling, what they have earned through the years, and they may even stay longer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Corporal Ofanime Akpabio. I'm from MCIW. I was hired in 2013, so I have about 10 years of service. I am a representative of Local 1678, and I just want to touch a few bases. My partner did a great job in talking about the staff shortages and how it affects us. I just want to make sure that we understand the impact of this mandatory drafting and the pre-drafting issues that we face. Not going home or being told you have to give up a day, 1 or 2 of your days off that you have worked 7 straight days. And it just minimizes your mental capacity, minimizes your ability to continue your day-to-day work. And your personal life, of course, your work-life balance is one of the things as a correctional officer, we're not afforded, by force or willingly, you're not really afforded that. So I just wanted to make that the impact of short staffing not just impacts correctional officers, but it impacts the population that we serve as well as the community. It makes it for more assaults, not just as, I'm sorry, Mr. Cash, in his report, he had mentioned the violence on on the population, and it's increasing on staff as well. So if you are overworked, you could not possibly defend yourself in a 2-minute period when you need to save your life, because we do face dangers within the walls. We may not complain about it all the time, but it is a reality once you go in for 8, 16, 12 hours. Those are our day-to-day survival methods. I speak about it as far as the impact on your body. Assault is one thing, and the inmates are taking advantage of the fact that the facilities are understaffed. There are more robberies taking places. There's definitely assault, sexual crimes is going up. So we just want to bring awareness about that. And then also I want to touch on the investigation that's going on from the Department of Labor about the time clock issue that some officers face. Older officers, we had issues where you come in at 2:30. You go to clock out at 11:15, your time sheet had been changed from 2:30 to 2:48, and then you left at 11:15, someone had already clocked you out at 11 o'clock. So that was an issue that we faced in corrections for years. And now that issue is being addressed. And we just want to bring that to the attention of the panel that, those are valuable hours that we missed, and, that money is owed to us. We may not be able to ever recoup all that we've lost, but that's something that we wanted to bring up, and that we're asking that, the persons responsible are held accountable, that this is not going to be a continuous issue. And we see some changes, but we would like for accountability to be presented. And then I want to touch bases on the hiring disparities, the wage disparities between new officers and veteran officers. There's a hyper focus on hiring new personnel, which we appreciate, but we also would like recognition for those of us who are in our mid-careers, who have committed time, years to the service. And also, a lot of us are in fear of January 2024. If no one knows, that is the first end date for the first round of retention bonus for those with over 20 years. And a lot of them are tired because we're not making enough money. We're not able, we can't stand on the same footing. So when you're forced to work extra 4 years, you kind of figure out your balance. So we're scared that we're also going to be even more crippled, and that's not probably included in the report that you've heard. So thank you. In summarization, thank you for taking your time to listen to us. Thank you so much.
Well, my name is Tiana Maines, and I'm from Local 1427. I started 2026 in corrections, and last year I switched over to case management. So I'm just going to touch on 2 of our main areas because everything else basically been touched on. We also have a shortage of staff for case management, and a lot of it comes from the amount of money that they're trying to offer case managers when they come in. I believe it's around 35 to 40,000. Nobody wants to come in making that much. They just can't survive off of it right now. But with us being short staffed comes a lot of issues, a lot of delays on the workloads that we have. It overworks us. And the IPs are very much aware that we have to prioritize based on the workloads that we do have. And sometimes we have to deal with attitudes behind the scenes, and we don't have radios and mace that we can carry. All we got is a prayer and a smile and hope we can get them through it and out the door. Another thing is our unpaid lunches. Most of us don't even take a lunch. We work through lunch because it's just so much to do. As part of corrections, we just feel like we should also have a paid lunch, because if we're taking our lunch and something happens, like they call and say, hey, y'all got a court release, mandatory court release, we have to get up. We have so much to do for that court release, we have to get up. And just like in corrections, they have to get up if it's a fight. We should also have unpaid lunch, because we don't go in and out of facilities. It's just too much to leave and come back. So we working. So technically we working 8.5 hours every day and having to take that unpaid lunch. So those are my main concerns for case management.
Thank you, all of you, bringing up really important issues that we appreciate. Any questions for the panel? Okay, thank you for all you do and for your service to our state.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. With that subcommittee, we have a short weekend because we are back in this room Monday at 1 p.m. to hear MDOT Port Administration, MDOT Aviation Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs, and Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. So another